Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Strategic Command series. That's right, the series. So Strategic Command, pretty much the whole series, is on sale right now over at matrixgames.com, or if you want to pick up their games through Steam, it's on sale over there. The sales are up to 60% off on a number of their titles within the Strategic Command series, and so today we're going to be taking a brief look at 4 different games in the series. We're going to start off with Strategic Command World War II, War in the Pacific. We'll probably play that for about 30 or 40 minutes, and then after that we will move on to Strategic Command World War I, which is my personal favorite in the series, and then World War II in Europe, and the American Civil War is probably how we'll wrap up. Although I reserve the right to mix that up a little bit. We'll see. We're going to take a brief look at each one of them, kind of talk about the games, where they fit within the series, some of the key features, how you play it, those kind of things, while we just kind of take a quick look at it. But yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. I hope you guys enjoy the stream, and let's get going here. So you can see Strategic Command World War II War in the Pacific is the newest game in the Strategic Command series. It does look at the Pacific Theater of Operations in World War II, as you might guess. Based on the title, and it is a turn-based I go, you go system, but let's just go ahead and jump in. You can play hot seat multiplayer, you can play by email plus, which is Matrix Games' sort of unique way of playing play by email. It's play by email, but really it's play by email through the game, so you basically just exchange files inside the game user interface, so you never have to bother with sending files via email. But let's go ahead and play. We're going to play single player today. You can see Strategic Command World War II in the Pacific. War in the Pacific has several different scenarios, part of the base game. It's got a Day of Infamy scenario, which is kind of the grand campaign. It's got a 1939 sort of border clash between Japan and the Soviets. It's got the Solomons campaign, which is a more narrow focus campaign looking at just the South Pacific. Same thing for the Marianas campaign for 1944, looking at those island hopping campaigns. And then the August Storm, which is the sort of run up to the end of the war with the Japanese being invaded in Manchuria, and an Iwo Jima campaign in the Pacific. Now, each one of these campaigns have different turn lengths, so each turn in the Iwo Jima campaign, for example, is a 2-day turn, whereas the Day of Infamy is 10 days per turn. And so the way that works is it's 10 days for one side, 10 days for the other. Again, I go, you go in terms of turn-based combat. But we are going to go ahead and do, I think we're going to look at the grand campaign mainly to kind of show off how the game works. We will play from the Japanese point of view, because they're going to be the ones pushing the initiative. So if we're going to be doing a shorter version of this, we're only going to be playing for about 40 minutes, we'll play as the Japanese. If you play as the Allies, you've got a bunch of different countries to manage. You've got the British Commonwealth colonies, Australia, you've got the US, China, both the communists and the nationalists. And then later in the game, you have the Soviets. There's not a lot to do with them early, but later in the game, you have the Soviets to manage. Whereas the Japanese, obviously they manage the Japanese and the minor Japanese allies, but that's who we're going to play as. So you can see here, this is one of those games that gives you a number of different options in terms of how you display your units on the map. You've got sort of 3D counters if you're playing kind of like a Axis and Allies type board game, if you will, but you can also turn those off and just get your standard kind of NATO counters for the units. And that's true pretty much of all the Strategic Command games and how you can do that. But we're going to go ahead and just play with 3D units. That's my personal preference in any event. We should get to go first here since the game does say the Axis starts first. So we should get a chance to launch the Japanese offensive across the South Pacific in our first turn, and we can kind of show off some of the different things. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of diplomacy for Japan in this game, but we can certainly show it in, in the other games if we don't get to it here. But you can see one of the big things with the Strategic Command series is you get these little pop-ups that basically tell you kind of key objectives or decisions that you make throughout the course of the campaign. So in this case, it's really just a briefing. It's telling you, as we're entering into this conflict, to liberate, our Asian allies from Western domination, basically the Japanese claim of the greater co-prosperity sphere. We're liberating all these places from Western imperialism. We might be imposing our own imperialism on them in the same time, but, you know, it's written to you as a way to give you some information about the game. So we want to inflict a strong blow on the U.S. Navy. That'll actually influence their national morale, conquer as much territory as possible to generate more money that we can then use to fuel our war economy as the Americans sort of mobilize and eventually turn, you know, the economic war turns against us. And then we also need to make sure that China and the Burma Road are closed down so that we can make sure that China doesn't become a base of operations against us. It also says there's an alliance that's coming with Thailand. Our forces and amphibious assault transports in the Gulf of Siam are to be used to conquer Malaya and capture Singapore. Do not use them to capture Bangkok. That's because if we go to war, basically here we're advised to declare war on Thailand so that our forces in Indochina can start advancing toward Burma. However, there's no need to seize Bangkok, as moves are currently underway to bring Thailand into the war on our side. Declaration of war on Thailand will not prevent the alliance, and a Thai corps will soon join our drive to the greater prosperity sphere. So our amphibious forces should be used to conquer Malaya and capture Singapore. Do not use them to conquer Bangkok. Yeah, there's no reason to attack the Thai forces directly because we're going to get them to our side. And then we also need, you know, it's kind of letting you know, hey, we should probably attack the Philippines, Borneo, Brunei, the Dutch East Indies, because all that's going to, you know, make sure that our economy gets the resources that they need. And there's also a strategy guide that the game provides, which you can leverage as well. And then there's open conflict between, you know, try to avoid fighting the communists, I guess. You know, they have a chance to swing to the Allies. So right now the communists are neutral. They haven't, like, joined the nationalists fighting against us. And don't go to war with the USSR. We, you know, keep certain garrison units in Manchuria in order to prevent a war against the USSR. This Reddit gives you that info. We don't need to read through that whole thing. Okay, so I guess at this point now we can go ahead and we can fight. So we've got our carriers off the coast of Hawaii here. We've also got a battle fleet back here, so we can go ahead and attack the Americans. Now, I assume the Americans won't have too much of an air, you know, combat air patrol to fight us. So right now you can see these 3 carriers. Each one of them has this little kind of purplish, bluish dot. That represents the type of attack you're going to make. So carriers can have 3 different, and fleet carriers specifically, can have 3 different types of attacks. You can go with fighters, which basically just means if the enemy attacks you, your fighters will provide combat air patrol. For any shipping in your sort of radius, these little hexes with the dashes through it mean that they're being given cover, as well as our own hex here is being given cover against enemy air attacks. But if I try and attack the American fleet with fighters, it's not going to be very effective. Meanwhile, if I go ahead and set the mode to mix, some of them will be fighters and some of them will be bombers, so you get a little bit more of a punch while also still having protection. And then you have bombers, which gives you the most attack value, but is more risky because you don't have escorts for your bombers, and if the enemy attacks you, then your carrier is at a disadvantage. You can see here these units all have a strength of 10 for the actual ship. That represents the hit points. And then you can see for the carriers, they have a separate number here to the right with a little ship icon, or airplane icon, sorry, that represents the aviation wing of the ship as well. There's also these little numbers to the right which indicate technology. And so if you go here, you can see it's got a Naval 1 technology, Advanced Fighters 1, Long Range Aircraft 1. We'll take a look at that in a moment here in terms of what does that all mean when we take a look at the research and development screens. But for the moment, let's go ahead and bomb Pearl Harbor. So you see there we did 4 damage. Now it's still a question mark. We don't actually have a visual on the American ships here to know how much strength they have left, but we did 4 damage to the American battleship here, which appears to be, well, we don't even know which battleship it is. There's some fog of war here. If we did do 4, that means they should be at 6 strength, unless they're under strength, which is possible. Sometimes the units in the early game are under strength. Let's go ahead and bomb them again. And they must have been at half strength because we just destroyed that bomber and only took 1 out of 11 hit points of damage. Our fighters are all over strength. The standard strength is 10 for a full strength unit, but if you have experience, which our fighters do have, you can gain additional hit points. You can see the experience down here represented by these sort of rising sun icons. The filled up ones are the ones you have more experience. Now, fleet carriers have 2 strikes, so you can attack 2 times in a single turn. Escort carriers or light carriers have 1 strike. Escort carriers actually only have fighters, I believe, whereas light carriers can still have the full gamut of bombers, fighters, and mix. But again, the light carriers only have 1 strike. So we destroyed 1 American battleship. Go ahead and try and destroy another. We did 3 damage to that one on our first strike. and wiped them out on the second strike. These all must be at half strength. So we're going to talk a little bit about national morale if we get another one of these battleships here. So let's go ahead and see if we can get another one. 3. That did do some damage back. And there you go. You can see a little pop-up there that says 664 national morale bonus. Up here, if you look along the top, you can see these little bars along the top of the screen represent national morale. So this is basically the morale of your country throughout the course of the war. One of the biggest things with Strategic Command, the way it models sort of the home front and attrition, is through morale. And if your morale hits 0, your country surrenders or leaves the war. So obviously managing your morale is important. Right now Japan's national morale is 96. Different events can give you bonuses, which gives you national morale back. Meanwhile, you know, doing damage to the enemy can also hurt their national morale and make them more likely to surrender. So destroying big, important, well, really destroying any unit, but especially big battleships, are going to do a lot more positive impacts to national morale. If you're the one doing the destroying, if you're the one losing, then obviously that hurts your national morale. And vice versa, right? Additionally, capturing important bases. You know, if you see an NM objective, that means that's an objective that has a lot of morale impacts, and so you want to, you know, protect your bases that have NM objectives, and you want to, take the enemy objectives such as they are. Now, I could hang around Pearl and risk getting attacked by the enemy. We've destroyed 3 battleships. I think that's a pretty good outcome for us right now. I don't want to risk my fleet carriers too much, so we're going to go ahead and pull out. Now, you can scroll with your mouse wheel. You can zoom in and out a little bit. This is the most zoomed in view, but if we scroll out twice, we kind of get this big strategic map. If we scroll in, we get kind of a more zoomed out kind of tactical map. And whatnot. Notice this wake. This wake is a national morale objective. So let's go ahead and put our troops ashore at Wake. They suffer some sort of simulated casualties, but the enemy didn't have any meaningful garrison there. So we quickly take Wake, and we should get some morale bonuses for taking that. A lot of Japanese forces are already in place to support our actual drive across the Pacific here. Another objective here is in the Marianas. I believe Saipan is ours. But Guam is not, right? Yeah, and you can see on the lower right here, when you click on an objective down here in the lower right, it gives you information about the objective. So you got national morale value 1, max entrench 2, national morale objective, allies 100%. That means the allies currently occupy the island. Can these guys get down there? They can. So we got the South Sea Special Forces, the Marines, they can land there. Let's make sure the Americans don't have any troops here. So that cruiser will bombard Agna, the capital of Guam. There's no one there, so we can go ahead and put our troops ashore. Again, they lose some casualties, or take some casualties, but Guam will be ours as well. That's another national morale bonus for us for taking that island. And then we've got a bunch of amphibious troops sorted to the north of the Philippines. Obviously, we're going to want to take the Philippines, but it's not going to be quite as easy of an exercise, perhaps, as some of the other objectives. So you can see here, we bombarded Aprari. It doesn't look like there's anybody there. I'm assuming there's some Americans, probably at Clark Field. Let's go ahead and we've got the 23rd Naval Flotilla with tactical bombers. This is another unit type here. We've also got the Naval Flotilla maritime bombers. So these would be like Bettys and Nels. The tactical bombers would be like dive bombers or light bombers. And then there's also strategic bombers as well. But let's go ahead and try and bomb Bataan. See what's there. I took a little bit of damage. All right, so that at least gave me some intel. You can see we got some recon on different Filipino forces. I don't actually see American forces here, but I see Filipino forces. That's this little star figure. American destroyer in the port at Manila. And then we've also got a light carrier, the Rougeau, down here. And you can see, again, Rougeau has fighters, bombers, mix. It has 1 strike, though, instead of 2. So we'll do a mix with that aircraft carrier. And we're going to go ahead and sail. I don't know that I want to try and go for Davao, but I don't see any troops there. So I guess in that case, let's just go ahead and put these guys ashore. Doesn't look like there's anybody there, so we'll go take Davao, which is the alternate capital to the Philippines, and another national morale objective. And then we'll go ahead and sail these guys. Second Kerr SNLF, landed at Capri. Armies are certainly more valuable. So let's put the let's do this. Can we put the 14th Army ashore? Move it. And we'll put the headquarters unit at Upreed. Because one of the other things that's important in the strategic command games is supply. So if you hit the S key, you can see here's the supply that my units will draw if they're in a given hex. So right now, most of these guys are at like 7 or 10 or something like that, based on the hex they're currently in. You can see these two fighters have 5, and so they're currently supplied at 5, and that's the hex value. Whereas right now, you know, the next turn, there will be 7 and 8. That 8 is driven by the headquarters unit pulling in additional supply. So sort of chaining headquarters together so that you can supply your units more effectively is important. Headquarters are very important to having, you know, better supply. All right, so the 14th Army went ahead and attacked the Filipino troops here in Luzon. They did some damage, but they didn't destroy them. The 16th Army will come down, land here. They took some damage landing. Go ahead and attack them as well. And so that's kind of everybody there. It should be enough to overrun the Philippines eventually, but right now that's going to be probably take a few turns here. But we've at least weakened the North Luzon Corps. Additionally, you can see there's 3 unit hexes here. That means they're a core unit, whereas these guys have 4. That means they're an army unit. So, you know, in terms of strength, the Marine units have 2 icons, but they can usually fight effectively at about a core strength. And then you've got garrison units, which are like this Hong Kong unit here with just the individual soldier. So go ahead and take Hong Kong from the British. So that should be a pretty big win for us to take Hong Kong. You can see China. We've already got a pretty large presence here in China, with some success in terms of what we've all attacked. I don't really have good intel on the interior in China. I don't know that I want to race forward into the interior of China. Maybe the supply situation in China is also not great. So we'll probably wait. I don't really want to race a 5. I guess we could try. I don't really have a lot of... I guess taking Fuzhou would be a good thing to do. But let's go down into Malaya as well. So I don't know where the Prince of Wales is. Let's... Alright, so there's British Corps at Kota Bharu. We're using a destroyer to scout. And we've detected the Prince of Wales and Repulse. They're both weakened units to represent sort of their ineffectual usage by the British here. But you get the Prince of Wales and the Repulse both here. We've got a maritime bomber over here. So we will go ahead and try to raid these guys. Maritime bombers, or actually these are Army medium bombers. Do we have any maritime bombers around here? I don't see any. Huh. Well, in any event, let's go ahead and strike these guys. Alright, no fighter escorts for them, so we did good damage there. Go ahead and use our... These are fighters, not bombers. Do we have any tactical? We got some tactical bombers here. So we'll go ahead and hit the Repulse here. Enemy interceptors did fly up to support the Repulse, but we do have these Zeros here that are also flying escort, so they do damage to the interceptors. I also get some damage to the interceptors via self-defense, and then they sank the Repulse. So big national morale bonus for us doing that. One of our fighters strafe the Prince of Wales. Didn't destroy it, but nearly did, and we'll go ahead and send our I-15 down here to finish it off. So we just destroyed the British battle fleet here, the 2 battleships north of Singapore. There is also an enemy destroyer in harbor, which could be a threat to our submarine for sure. But at least the bulk of the battle fleet is done for. And we've got a bunch of amphibious units here. So let's take Kota Bharu. So one thing to keep in mind, these guys are all on landing craft, but landing craft actually get a bonus when they, or not a bonus, but they're able to attack. So you can see here they do 1 damage if I attack directly. I can do that. Then I can land them and then attack again. So you can actually get multiple attacks. Always best to attack out of the amphibious unit if you have strikes available. Now, if you stay on your transport, you're not going to get another strike right away. So you can see here, strike 1. That means that's how many times that unit can attack. Alright. So we'll take Kota Bharu, which is obviously an important base here. We get some landing casualties. Do you have any headquarters units here? We do. So we're going to put one of those into Cote d'Ivoire to draw supply. And then we'll do the 25th Army to go after Penang and the British aircraft unit. Their aircraft units are particularly good against enemy aircrafts, but very vulnerable to attack from ground units. So, all right. So Penang is ours. Penang is also important because you can see it as a little port hex here. Ports generate a lot more supply, so they're very useful in terms of, you know, supporting offensives. Oh no! I moved within a hex of the Singapore port, which results in defensive, you know, fortress gunfire, if you will. Alright, so I decided to attack Singapore directly rather than go for Kuala Lumpur, because these units next turn can go for Kuala Lumpur. Okay, so that's the bulk of the initial offensives, I think. We've taken Davao in the south. We've taken Guam and Wake Island. We've bombed Pearl Harbor. I haven't done a lot in China, mainly because I'm not totally certain what to do there yet. A lot more operations in the South Pacific, but not really quite yet. Can move our battleships out down towards Singapore. I'm not sure. This percentage, by the way, represents the likelihood to do damage, I believe, to a unit in the port. And if you do damage, you've got a chance of a 1-to-1, but there's also a good chance that naval gunfire from the port will damage your own ship, so I'm going to stand off a little bit. Because Singapore does have fortress guns. It might have been better to use some of those amphibious troops that were headed toward Singapore to go for Brunei or Miri before they had a chance to raise troops there. But we'll worry about that another time. So, let's see here. It did suggest to go to war with Thailand so we could invade Malaya from the north and get that supply line. So we can go to the diplomacy screen here, and this is where you can actually spend money to try and woo different countries to your side. Now, it's quite a bit of money. We've got 150 MPPs to start. You can see here, if we were trying to woo the Soviets to our side, right now they're neutral, 20%. They're not. It would show a sort of American flag if it was a chance they'd come into the war against us. But, or actually, no, they are 20% allies. Never mind. So they're 20% toward the allies, which means gradually that number can go up over the course of the war, and that when it gets to 100, they will declare war on you. Now, we could spend 200 MPPs to get a chit, which would give us a 5% chance of swinging that toward the Axis powers. Different countries are more or less expensive. Afghanistan, for example, is how much? 75. Bhutan is 75. Thailand is 75. But Thailand is already 95% toward the Japanese. So we'll probably leave that as. They'll almost certainly swing to our side fully no matter what. And you can see different countries here have different amounts. Most of these countries are probably going to go toward the allies. It looks like Portuguese India, Mongolia, Dutch East Indies, Bhutan. These are all going to go to the allies. In different strategic games, different strategic command games, the diplomacy has a greater impact, in my opinion. But in the Pacific one, a lot of these countries are going to go one way or the other based on how you attack them. That being said, you can spend points. Influence has a certain number of times you can invest. So right now we've got 3 influence points we can spend across these to try and change the odds of what direction they'll go. Additionally, also you can declare war here. So if we go to Thailand, we can go ahead and declare war. I guess we should. It says we should, right? So I'm starting to move my armor through Thailand. We'll see how that unfolds next turn. I'm not entirely sure what to expect there. But you can see that front line. I also really like how the game has these little front line indicators that show you pockets and things like that. It's especially satisfying in the World War II Europe game where you're like rolling over and creating huge pockets. Because that also does influence supply. But I think that's it. I guess we can go ahead and do some R&D. So if we go to research here, you can see these are different stats. We mentioned research before where you got like a little number next to the unit that influence, tells you how much technology that unit has. So right now you can see on the right side of each one of these columns, there's a row. There is a number. So right now Japan has researched level 1 out of a possible 2 infantry tech. Anti-tank weapons 0 out of 5. Advanced fighters 1 out of 5. Each level you go up improves the quality of the unit that has those upgrades. You have to pay to upgrade them. So we can go ahead and, naval construction is 35 MPPs. We're researching it at 1. We could research it at 2 or 3 or 4 to try and get this up. But if we go ahead and we spend 35 MPPs, you can see we increased it to 2. And right now our research tech is 0 out of 4. So obviously Japan probably wants more than 0 out of 4 naval construction tech. And, in terms of what you're doing here, naval construction increases the supply value of ports. It also increases industry centers on primary supply centers. So it's sort of a very loose indicator of your naval ability. It also influences supply at ports that are built up. So it's kind of a logistics thing. Production technology is more, reduces the cost to buy things, and industrial technology improves your overall economy. And so if you go to the actual purchase screen here, you can see industrial technology would lower the cost of maritime bombers from 115 down 5%. Additionally, right now you can see we have level 2 long-range aircraft and level 1 naval weaponry unlocked. So right now the base version of maritime bombers is 115, but if we want to go ahead and give them the most advanced tech we have, 2 long-range, 1 naval, then, actually in this case the price didn't change. Interesting. Oh yeah, it did, up here. I'm not sure why it didn't. Oh, that's our available, sorry. The cost is over here, 173 is what it costs. If we were not to do that, then it would cost 150. But it costs more or less based on, the research tech. And then also you can see over here, you see a reduction in cost based on different factors in the game. But let's go ahead and end the turn and see what the Allies do. So we'll get some notices here. You can see the Chinese people welcome the U.S. entrance into the war because we just bombed Pearl Harbor. Chinese morale suffers with the loss of Hong Kong. British morale is reduced by the fall of Hong Kong. So we went back to national morale stuff up here. Those are you'll see impacts to each one of those stats. U.S. morale suffers from the loss of Guam, loss of Wake. Japan celebrates the capture of Guam and Wake. Hong Kong surrenders. We get 22 MPPs. When you capture a capital, you can basically plunder the treasury from that side, and it gives you additional money to spend on the next turn. Thailand joins the Axis, so now they're now on our side. Partisan activity in Manchuria. We can talk about partisans. We'll talk more about partisans, I think, in the European version of the game. Booty, so to speak, yes. U.S. industry begins mobilizing for war. So the U.S. industrial economy kind of starts low, but it will increase over the course of the war as they industrialize. And so that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Meanwhile, now that we bombed Pearl Harbor, American units are going to start deploying in Hawaii to represent it's no longer a surprise. We're getting a corps of Thai soldiers in Thailand. This panic is spreading in Hong Kong, or in Singapore, sorry, due to our advance. Same as in the Philippines. USSR is sending aid to the communist Chinese. And there's our income of 306 MPPs. So, Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek. I think these are allied strategic advice items that seem to fire no matter what. So you can see the American objectives and things like that. We don't need to look at that. So, yeah. Alright, so Singapore apparently got some reinforcements. They're up to level strength 5. Meanwhile, American destroyers go after our subs near Pearl. American destroyers must have left the Philippines to come attack our subs near Singapore, because the Americans did have a small fleet at Manila. We saw one of their ships in harbor there. American cruisers got some balls sailing out to Fuzhou. That's dicey. U.S. sends General Stilwell to China. Vinegar Joe. Also, you can see weather is indicated on the map here, so some areas it's snowing, some areas it's raining. That has combat effects. Burma Road's kicking into gear. And that was the Allied turn. So obviously they'll do more as they get stronger, but right now, that's what just happened here. Okay, so now we can raid coastal shipping, so something worth considering. Also, the Yamato apparently is deployed. Unstable, you can buy the game directly through Matrix, or you can buy it directly through Steam. There's the sale is on both platforms. All right, so let's see here. What are we gonna do? There's rain in Singapore. Does it mean I can't bomb it? Yeah, I can't bomb where it's raining. Lame. All right. So I'd like to reduce Singapore if I can. Be great to get it out of the way. Nice. All right, Singapore is ours. So that'll play great at home. And then we can go for Kuala Lumpur, which again, I can't really bomb it with aviation because of the weather, so might as well just move our army unit up here, attack these guys directly, and then I think Malaya's going to fall this turn. Alright, so all of Malaya will be ours. The British have been ejected right quick, way faster than historical. So now we can rain into... Oh no, I ran into an enemy... I was going to say, I ran into an enemy ambush, but apparently it didn't hurt me too bad. Undo that. Fall back here. All right. The Thai Corps will begin the invasion there of Burma. These guys need to reinforce. They can only do 3, though, because their supply is only a 5. So supply influences how much you can reinforce, too. Go ahead and operate these guys out to Bangkok. They should be able to do a full reinforcement up that way. And we'll send this headquarter unit up here, because right now supply sucks here, right? With the addition of the headquarters, it'll make supply a bit better. Now, I don't know if we need to... It doesn't look like we need to do any partisan garrisons in Malaya. Certain locations you need to garrison, so you see this P here. If there is a partisan icon, there can be partisans who rise up against you, based on, like, if you've got garrisons adjacent to these hexes where there's partisans. So no partisans will rise in Wuhan, because we got a garrison there, but if we moved all the garrisons out of all the hexes adjacent to Wuhan, they could rise up there, for example. And we saw some... They can also do damage, so we saw some damage last turn for some partisans. I think it was in China. Alright, let's go after this American cruiser with our maritime bomber. Oh, yeah, I guess so. They didn't really do much damage there, unfortunately. I'd hope they do more than that. Let's send one of our cruisers out this way. A surface engagement in the Strait of... in Taiwan. Now, I can't really go after it. When ships are in harbor, attacking them with naval units is very ineffective, but bombing them with aircraft can be very effective. And so you see there we just sank that American cruiser in the one Chinese port still held by the Chinese. All right, let's move forward here and try and drive on Manila against that Filipino Army Corps. Shattered, destroyed. 150 national morale bonus. So we just destroyed one of the Filipino Army Corps. There's another one in Malaya. I believe there's an American garrison at Corregidor. Alright. Let's move up toward here. Nice. Also, when you have an enemy naval unit in a hex adjacent to your ground units, you can very effectively attack them too. What's the... They're set to mix. That's probably good enough. Let's go ahead and move these guys against the American sub here. Maybe we'll switch these guys over to bomb. Got the subs in port there. That's a good result. Submarines can be a real nuisance. Also, enemy torpedo boats over here. We'll go ahead and attack them with our cruisers. I don't think... they fled into the port. So if you see here, I can't really effectively attack them in port. I can try, and I can take damage. Alright, so we do need to capture the British possessions here. I can't really set anybody up as amphibious yet, unfortunately. So to take Singapore early, I have delayed taking Brunei and Kuching. Hopefully that doesn't come back to bite me. You can have troops get put on transports, transport here, or amphibious if they're not garrison units. Amphibious transports, long-range transports up here, but I don't have any troops in range of Brunei yet, so I'll probably have to wait till next turn after the fall of Singapore to do that. This army attacking this garrison unit's behind a fortification. They also have better supply than our army unit, so that plays a big role in how effective my attack was, or rather wasn't. Okay, so we're making progress in the Philippines. We've taken Singapore. Probably need to pull our carriers back, I assume. Well, actually, there's a destroyer here. Can we go ahead and try and get these guys? I don't know where the American carriers are. Maybe we'll find out. Alright, well, maybe not. Enemy interceptors attack our carriers. Attack on their destroyer. But we did finish the destroyer, so we broke the rule. We went for a second attack at Pearl Harbor. Can I see? Let's try attacking the... Alright, so we got defensive and anti-aircraft fire. But we did do quite a bit of damage to this battleship here. So they've got an anti-aircraft unit here that's shooting at our bombers. But we did manage to sink the last American carrier in Pearl Harbor. So I think that's a good result. I'm assuming the American carriers are somewhere around here. So let's set this mode to fighters so they can provide cover, because the other guys are already set to bomber. Alright, so we finished another American battleship off, and you can see here the Japanese morale is doing much better now. It's over 100%, just slightly, at 105, 273, 100% is 105. Whereas the Americans' national morale is now down to 95,820, which is 95%. The British are down to 91%. They lost the battleships, and also they'll get a big hit for losing Singapore next turn. The Chinese are at 75% because they already have a lot of their territory occupied, and the Australians are 92%. And if you're ever trying to follow this stuff, you've got a nice little report section here that gives you information about land units, air units, naval units, total number in play. It also gives you a nice little tabulation of units lost. You can do detailed losses here, where you can see an actual count of the units destroyed. You can also do a graph here if you want to take a look at, here's income coming from convoys, here's income interdicted due to raiders. You've got strategic bombing damage done, which we haven't done anything yet, obviously. You've got research and diplomacy here, how much have you spent on that? Plunder, how much have you taken from capitals that you've taken? Total MPP production collected, the green line, versus lost as casualties, the red line. Obviously, if every turn you have a greater red line than green line, that's going to be sort of a funnel of weakening your forces. You can see any country here by clicking on the list up here. So the Americans, you know, their income is just below 400 right now. You can see turn one, they lost over 500 worth. The American turn, they didn't lose anything, and they collected their 400. And then this, you know, next turn, here's what we've seen so far. This turn, they've lost 720. So between these two turns, they're obviously losing a lot more than they're getting. And then you've got national morale graphs as well that show you kind of the outcome of the different engagements that you've fought. So that's that. Now, like I said, tonight is a stream where we are doing a piece-by-piece look at the different Strategic Command games in honor of the Strategic Command sale. This is a sponsored stream, so I am being paid to bring this to you, but just want to make you guys aware of that. This is sort of a real quick and dirty look at Strategic Command World War II War in the Pacific, the newest of the Strategic Command games. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to the next game in the series I want to show off, and that's going to be Strategic Command. I said we were going to do World War I, but let's actually do Strategic Command World War II War in Europe, which is the European version of this game, which looks at kind of a zoomed-in view of the European theater of operations. All right, we're back. More Strategic Command. This one, Strategic Command World War II War in Europe. This is I think this was the first of the remakes by Fury Software. Strategic Command's an old and classic series that goes back to the early, well, I guess the late 90s at least, where they had classic versions of the game, which are also available through Matrix Games. But this was, more recently, in recent years, they remade these games. War in the Pacific is the newest game. War in Europe, I believe, was the first of the remakes. And as you would guess from the title, it looks at World War II in Europe. Now, this has a bunch more scenarios with this game. You've got Storm over Europe, which is kind of the holistic look at World War II. You've got Attack in the West, which starts with the invasion of France. You have Operation Barbarossa, which, obviously the German invasion of Russia. Case Blue, which is the Stalingrad starting point, a Kursk starting point, a D-Day starting point. There's a 1940s daily scenario, which looks at the, I believe, the invasion of France, but it's like a one-day turn. So some of these are kind of operational scenarios, and some of them are strategic scenarios. So you've got Storm in Europe, which is kind of the grand strategy one. Sickle Cup one-day turns, and this is a little bit of a shorter time frame, but more compressed in terms of the turn length. A number of these different scenarios here throughout this. We don't need to list every single one. And apparently there's also a Calm Before the Storm one, which is, I believe, a community scenario that was, I'm assuming, gives you some more time to do diplomacy and build up your forces before the actual war. That's interesting sounding. I don't think I've ever played that one. And they also have a hypothetical World War III, if the Allies had listened to Patton and gone to war. Or I guess Stalin is going to war in this one. Again, another community pack scenario. So there's like community mods and scenarios that can be downloaded as well for these games also. But we're going to do Storm over Europe because we always like to invade Poland. Wait, what? And we're going to go ahead and play this campaign. Again, we'll probably play from the Axis point of view just because it's easier to drive the action and show the game from that side, especially in a 1939 scenario. Again, same as the other Strategic Command games, you can get the 3D counters or you can go with the NATO counters. Let's go with the NATO counters just to kind of show you the difference here. And there's a whole bunch of different advanced settings that you can do as well in this. You can actually change some of the different scripts that'll get run in the game that change some of the events or tweak some of the events. So if these games rely a lot on historical events to kind of drive some of the narrative behind it. Whereas obviously if you change that can influence the game quite a bit. So you can see here, report on Axis war aims. We are finally in a position to undo the dictates of Versailles, which so weakened our country at the end of the last war. With our new panzers on the ground and the Luftwaffe in the air, the Kriegsmarine at sea, now is the time for us to wage... Well, they didn't really want to go to war with the rest of the world when they invaded Poland, but they were silly about it. Or maybe, perhaps stupid. But anyway. All right, so... Obviously, we haven't shown necessarily the victory goals here for these different scenarios. Every scenario has different victory goals. I believe the grand campaign from the Germans, you win a major victory if you capture both London and Moscow. But there's minor victories, basically like survive and hold certain cities. We can take a look at that in our next game. But right here you can see, obviously these are the different counters here. So you've got the little X icon on the square, which is infantry. The circle here represents armor. You've got the little country icon next to the hex to show you this. I'm not used to playing the game in this version because I usually don't. And then you've got the Polish icons here. Now we are at war. It's September 1st, so we're going to go to war with Poland right away. Diplomacy, a little bit more important in this game than in the Pacific game. There's a lot more countries you can do diplomacy with. Probably not wise as the Germans to spend any money trying to convince the UK or France not to go to war. You can see they're already at 100%. They're not at war yet, but they're going to auto-declare when we end the turn. The U.S., meanwhile, you can spend money to try and keep them on the other side. USSR the same. Italy is not actually in the war yet. They are not yet in the Axis, but they are 65% of the way there. So we could spend some money to speed up the Italians. We could spend money to bring the Bulgarians in on our side. Try, probably futilely, to keep the Canadians out, bring the Finnish into our side, influence the Greeks, the Hungarians, all these different countries. Like, diplomacy in this version of the game is more important than in the Pacific game. And there is a 3D counter version, like we said, so we can go over here, we can change 3D units, and it'll take a second here to load, but you can see all these icons just showed up in 3D as well. But we're going to go ahead, we said we were going to play this one in the 2D versions, the chits, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And actually, can I... Here's the victory conditions here. So Axis decisive victory is to control Berlin, Rome, Warsaw, Paris, London, Moscow, Leningrad, Stalingrad, and Cairo. Decisive victory for the Allies is to control Berlin, Rome, Warsaw, Paris, London, Moscow, and Washington, D.C. So obviously you can't win a decisive victory as the Americans or the Allies if you lose D.C. That makes sense. Or Moscow, or London. There's minor victories as well, but we're not going to look at all that. So, what are we going to do? Well, we should probably crush Poland first, right? Because the French are going to mobilize here against us soon. So the faster we can crush the Poles, the better, because we need to redeploy a lot of these troops. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to wait on diplomacy here. So we want to get to Warsaw. If you take a capital, it generally causes the country you're fighting to surrender. Sometimes certain countries have alternate capitals where they can move their capital to if you take it. It doesn't look like Poland has any alternates. So really it's a race to Warsaw. So we do have some aviation here. Fighters, tactical bombers. Let's go ahead and, I guess, go for the infantry here. Enemy fighters are going to intercept us, but we've got escorts with us. That adjacent air unit. So we destroyed 3 of the enemy fighters, and we did 2 damage to the ground units there. So this is a corps. This is an army. Really? It's a 1? East Prussia assault is not very well resourced, huh? Got enemy contact. When you run into an enemy unit that you hadn't previously seen, like if you rush forward and run into an enemy that you hadn't previously seen, they can kind of get like a reaction attack on you, and that's what we just saw there. I was trying to race in behind the Poles there and, destroy them by flanking them, and getting room for the, 21st Corps here to come in. But we didn't destroy the Modlin army. We've crippled it. It's down to 20%, but we haven't destroyed it yet. Let's do some recon here. There's nothing in Danzig, so let's just race the Frontier Corps into Danzig. Take that, move south, attack this Polish cavalry unit there, and drive it back. So we've taken Danzig, which was sort of ostentatiously, it's the claim anyway, we made about the reason for the war. We've got aviation units here, so we'll take the medium bombers. Do they not have escorts? Because those fighters already flew? So these guys have an entrenchment level of 0. If they did have an entrenchment level, my medium bombers could reduce that. Are there entrenchment levels down here? No, so the Polish are not ready. There's no entrenchment value here. Medium bombers, they do affect readiness and morale, so you can see these in red, or these grayed out icons down here, readiness and morale. Very important to how effective a unit is going to fight. Obviously, our readiness and morale is higher, so our units are... That's a reason our units will fight better. Alright, so just had enemy contact with that cavalry, but didn't actually lose anything. And then we used our second corps here to shatter the cavalry to the north of Bidogovsk. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Move our armor in behind the enemy troops there. I should get 2 attacks with armor, so that's a difference. Infantry doesn't get 2 attacks, armor does. Move our headquarters here under von Bock forward. So headquarters influence supplies, we've already said, so it's important. You can see here our supply within Germany is pretty much all at like a 9 or a 10, but inside Poland, it's not as good. That being said, next turn it will be very good for the troops here, because when you're in a city, headquarters tend to draw better. Cities tend to be areas you draw supply from. Some cities more than others. But we're driving toward Warsaw here in the north. The first corps, there's an enemy army here. So on the 3D icon, you've got like the number of soldiers that represent if it's a corps or an army. On the NATO chits, you see 3 X's here. That means it's a corps. 4 X's mean it's an army. I'm not going to attack the army at Posen, but I am trying to sort of prevent them from trying to drive toward Berlin by advancing there. All right, so we've got the tactical bombers here. We've got border troops. I'd like to get to Lutz so we can get toward Warsaw. So nice little attack there from our tactical bombers. Let's try and sneak in behind these guys. Attack the cavalry with our... Cavalry is much weaker, so a corps attacking cavalry is more efficient than it going up against an infantry army. Alright, so we lost our chance to attack with that corps because we ran into an enemy mechanized corps here at Krakow. Mechanized are a different unit type that are available in the game. And these numbers that you see before we attack each time, they're estimated results. It's not guaranteed that you see that result. We also have some Slovak troops down here, so the Bernau Corps here is a Slovak Corps, which is you can have minor allies, and that's what they are. You can see here both those attacks did better than the estimate. We've also surrounded this unit here, so they will draw no supply except what the city provides. So when you surround units, it greatly influences their ability to fight. Not immediately. It takes a little bit of time, but they will wear down quickly when they're surrounded. Alright, so we successfully overran that force. Our armor can race forward toward Warsaw if we want. Won't quite get there. You can see kind of a shadow on the map here. That represents areas you don't have intel on. Whereas if you've got sort of a lighter hex, that represents areas that you've already got intel on. So we can actually fly a fighter unit out toward Warsaw, and that will effectively scout. And you can see that shadow got pushed forward, and we discovered there's an army here just to the east of Lutz. We can move our armor up here into the zone of control, which influences your ability to move. Or we could swing in around behind Kreshwa and try and, destroy those guys there. But I think in the interest of trying to wrap this war up quickly, we'll move through Lutz and attack the army here. Armor units, as we've said, can attack twice. So they cripple this enemy army. It's not going to be able to really do much. Now, in theory, the enemy could try and drive in toward our rear near the Moravian Gap here and take some of these towns behind us, which could prevent us from, effectively pushing on if it influences the general supply of these guys. But I don't think I'm too worried about that. So that's most of my units here for the Germans here this turn. We've also got some stuff in France, but again, we're not going to actively attack France right now. So no reason to do anything there. We do have some naval vessels as well, which we could use in bombardment duties if there were enemy Polish soldiers around the coast. Because we took Danzig right away, there was no fortress there to bombard. So I think we're safe in not doing that. We move our air units up a little bit so they're in better contact with our advance. What's the supply situation look like? It's going to be only 5 up there if we don't move these. If we don't move on Rundstedt forward. But there's no city to base him out of. Let's see how that... It's slightly better. It gets up to 6. Alright. I think that pretty much does it. Now, there are options down here. Reinforce, upgrade, next unit options. Oh, that's right. We do have shipping here. So we've got some ships. We've got the Deutschland, which is represented as a heavy cruiser instead of a pocket battleship. Go ahead and set it to Raider. So convoy mode set to Raider. And go ahead and put it on this. You can see these little lines. This represents convoys between Canada and the UK. This is the US and UK. So these guys, the sub is already set to hunt. So we'll put these guys on this convoy route. The British are going to end up going to war with us. So red convoy route represents an active convoy route. Is there anybody south of there? No. We've also got this sub out here. The blue icon represents an active friendly convoy route for what it's worth. Move our sub around here. You can also, this game does a good job of conveying like why it's so damn important to take France for the Germans, because their sub's got to go all the way around. All right. And the rest of our fleet is largely just in here. CC or the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, I guess it's like a cruiser, kind of like a battle cruiser. They're a little bit under strength for a battle cruiser, but coastal or commerce cruiser maybe. Actually, let's go. Let's take a look. So if we go to Germany, heavy cruiser is a CA, battle cruiser is a CC. I don't know why it should be BC, shouldn't it? Anyway, you can see here we can buy more units. In theory, we could buy a cavalry division. We could buy garrison or anti-air. The lit up ones are the ones we can afford. Slovakia even has the ability, in theory, to buy more, although the number here represents your build limits, so right now we don't have any spare build units here for Slovakia. I don't have enough money, really, to buy anything I'd want to buy. But, for what it's worth, the game also already has some units under production for us. So if we go to the production queue here, you can see January of 1940, the Germans will get I think this is an airborne unit. And then you've got these different icons. Honestly, just for the sake of this, let's go ahead and switch back to the 3D icons, because it is much clearer. If you're not familiar with NATO counters, it is much clearer what you're looking at when you go to these counters, especially when you're looking at the purchase stuff. So if we go to production, you can see, yep, paratroopers here. We'll get a ship here in Stettin on February of 41. You've got some tactical bombers, maritime bombers, tanks, subs already being built, headquarters unit. And you can add to that as well based on what you purchase. The Italians aren't in the war yet per se, but they are. We could buy stuff for the Italians too. Even though they're not like actively in the war, you can still purchase for them. The Italians have 110 MPPs, the Germans have 100 right now. But I don't think we're going to do anything with that. I don't know that there's anything I want to spend on. Maybe moving Hungary closer to the Axis, get them into the war on our side more quickly. It's only 50 MPPs. Italy doesn't have any diplomacy ability right now, but we can spend 2 chits here out of our 5 to bring Hungary closer. They're at 80%. That'll move them a little closer, possibly. We'll see. Let's go ahead and end this turn, see what happens. Polish morale suffers from battlefield losses. All right, Lieutenant General Kurt Student's 7th Flieger Division is a partially formed and trained unit of paratroopers. Despite its incompleteness, it could be used in the later stages of the invasion of Poland or in an early attack on France. Alternatively, we could allow it to complete its training and formation, in which case it will deploy at full strength at Hamburg at the end of this year. Would you, therefore, like to deploy an understrength and only partially trained 7th Flieger Division at Breslau now? Yes. Or let it complete its training so that it will deploy at full strength in 1940. If you say yes, you'll receive 50 MPPs that had previously been assigned to completing its training and formation. These can be invested wherever you wish. So we get, basically, it's like cut the training short and you get more money back. It was rushed to the service before it completed its required training. However, by saying yes, it'll be available for operation sooner and could be used if you wish to follow up your invasion of Poland with an immediate offensive elsewhere. I'm going to say no, just because I don't think I need it right now, and I'd rather get a full-strength unit. UK declares war on Germany. France declares war on Germany, as we expected. British industry and trade start switching to military production. France mobilizes for the war effort. Oh, nice. Foreign minister reports diplomatic success. Hungary, 21% toward the Axis. I think that pushes them to 100%, and they'll join the war right away. I think. Germany's income is 156. plus 40 from trade with Norway, plus 28 with trade with Sweden. So those convoy routes represent income. If you interdict those convoy routes, it can lower the income that you get from them, but it basically represents trade, which drives income. I don't know that the Allies have any units that they're going to immediately start attacking us with. Hungary's preparing for war. You can see the Polish here are pulling some of their units back toward Warsaw to maybe to form a new defensive line, because we so thoroughly penetrated their defensive lines. You can see a bunch of units rushed into service on the French border in the Maginot Line. And the game is thinking. You can see fleet movings down here. Now, we don't get to see everything that's being moved. So that's one of the things, like, sometimes it's like, what's going on? I see all this stuff on the lower left-hand corner. Well, the AI, you know, because of fog of war, you're not going to see everything that happens. And so there are things happening, potentially, that we do not see. Evacuation of Polish destroyers to the UK. Hungary has joined the Axis. So Hungary's now in the war on our side. That was, I guess, useful. We've got, what, like 4 more armies here? All right, invading Great Britain. A study of staff officers looking into the question of invading Great Britain has reported that if we are to do so in 1940, there's a number of steps we should take to help prepare the way. Invest in air power to knock out the Royal Air Force. Invest in amphibious warfare technology. Preparing airborne forces to drop onto English soil. Using the Kriegsmarine to escort invasion forces. Securing port so that supplies and reinforcements can be brought to the channel. Okay. But anyway, you've got the 2 armies and 1 corps here in Hungary are now in the war, which isn't immediately useful, I don't think. I don't think the Poles will last long enough for it to matter. All right, let's attack Krakow's mechanized unit. See if we can destroy this army. Alright, so we shattered the Prusy army there. Just destroyed that. The 10th Corps here will push on to go to finish off the Krakow army. And we did that. Warsaw only has a garrison unit in it? Interesting. I'm inclined to attack everywhere I can because units gain strength when they fight. So if you get like a 0 to 2, it's a good idea to attack because you'll actually gain experience. And as these experience icons down here tick up, you will gain, you know, valuable experience that can be used toward effectively making your units more effective in combat. Now, I'm assuming the Warsaw garrison has some amount of entrenchments here. So we can see actually the Modlin garrison here has 5 out of 6 potential entrenchments. You can use bombers here to reduce that. I'm not sure if it's... Can medium bombers do it? Yeah, so you see one from 5 to 4 in that raid. Let's move the 3rd Panzer tanks to Warsaw, see if we can drive these guys out. Alright, so we destroyed the garrison in Warsaw and moved in to take the city. So the enemy may try and counterattack their next turn if they have the strength. I don't know that they do. But we should be able to win a pretty quick victory here by taking Warsaw so quickly. There are some cavalry units here which are notionally a threat. But we just destroyed that pocket. There's a pocket here at Posen, or however you pronounce that. But I think Poland's done for. I don't know that it makes sense to attack. I'm assuming we'll get some sort of Soviet agreement, although we sure destroyed them pretty quickly. no reason at all to bring the Hungarians into the fight. I mean, they joined our side, so good for us, but in fact, probably so good that what we should do is we should operate this unit here, despite being in front of a Polish army. We're going to operate them back to the German border, put them in fortresses south of Metz here, or Mainz. So you can see these little, like, they kind of look like barbed wire view things. That indicates troops that are in entrenchments. So these are fortifications. If the enemy attacks, the defenders get a big advantage. We use the reinforce tool here to reinforce all these troops here because none of them are at full strength, so they're all up to 10 now. We spent MPPs to do it, but that's a quick way to reinforce your units. And now we've almost locked off the border with France. They could still attack us and perhaps have some success. But overall, I think that's a good result. Let's go ahead and, can we operate some of these fighters back too? So you spend MPPs to move units more quickly, effectively by air or by rail. But we can go ahead and move these fighters back here. So now we'll have multiple aviation units to provide air cover in the event the enemy wants to attack. We could fly them back, but you can see they go a lot less. They don't go as far if you fly them back manually. But yeah, so Poland should fall with the fall of Warsaw. They don't have any alternate capitals that I can see in the east. And then we did see there was some damage to British shipping based on the raiders that we have on their supply lines out here. Where are we looking? Over here. So we've got the Deutschland interdicting Canadian supplies. You don't always want to leave these guys in the same hex turn after turn because the enemy will come for you. They'll see your shipping on their supply lines. I will say, though, that having Hungary in the war early does pose some interesting options with regards to Yugoslavia. You can also force march a unit, so you see this green hexes, this is how far you can move. If you click on it again, it actually gives you orange hexes. Force marches allow you to move more quickly, but it does come at a cost of readiness and morale. The Italian Navy is decently sized. Might as well upgrade the ships in port to full strength. We don't have a ton of money for the Italians, but I'd rather the Italian fleet be ready when war comes. Which is pretty much spent all their money. Diplomacy-wise, Germany still has 91 chits. We can't really afford anything with it. I guess we could do some R&D. Although I don't even have enough to research infantry weapons or long-range anything, pretty much. I could do nothing with 90 MPPs. Now, I could bank it and just save it, but alternatively, you know, we got our chits back because Hungary joined the war, so those 2 chits we spent on them come back to us. And now we could try and convince Bulgaria to join the war if we want. We can spend 1 MPP there, or 50 MPPs to get 1 chit. So they're at 70%, 5% chance that we'll swing them further to the Axis. Romania is another country you might want to convince to come to your side. I feel like Yugoslavia is a tricky one, because there's often a coup mechanic that'll trigger when you try and do that. So they may be like 90% Axis and then swing back to the Allies because the historical coup happens. I don't think that's guaranteed, but it certainly can happen. But anyway, we have 1 hex here adjacent to Luxembourg that's unguarded. I could have moved the 12th Corps on the Dutch border down to guard it, but we'll see what the Allies do. Let's go ahead and end the turn. Polish morale collapses from the loss of Warsaw. Red Army begins to cross the border into Poland. Poland's morale plummets as news spread that the Red Army has crossed the border. Our offensive against Poland has been a great success, and the Polish army has been decisively defeated. Molotov, the Soviet foreign minister, is now urging us to pull back to our previously agreed partition lines and honor our non-aggression pact with the USSR. If we say yes to honoring the pact, then we will gain imports from the USSR worth 25 MPPs a turn. If we say no, then we'll lose these imports, and the USSR will swing 20 to 30% toward the Allies as we push the Red Army out of Poland, should we honor the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. If we say yes, then our economy will benefit significantly from imports from the USSR. If we say no, then we will have a better launching point for future invasion of the USSR. However, by saying no, we will have to invade sooner than we might have wished due to the anger we will trigger in the USSR by not honoring the pact. We will also only have an opportunity to annex Lithuania in the spring of 1940 if we say yes to this. Otherwise, we would have to invade the country we wish to seize it. and doing so would swing the USSR dramatically toward the Allies. So I say we honor the pact here. Poland surrenders because we took Warsaw. But now we'll have the honor the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So you can see the borders all change, and then the USSR occupies eastern Poland. So they get everything up to basically Warsaw. Canada declares war on Germany. Canada's supply convoys begin to the UK. Scientists report progress in ground attack weapons for the Italians, up to 38%. We should get some plunder from Poland, too. Or did we? I might have missed that. So there you go. Meanwhile, the border with France, heavily fortified. But they didn't move. They didn't attack toward us. So nothing happened there quite yet. Good old Sitzkrieg now. You can see the Allies are exchanging some units in and out of Mulhouse. It looks like putting more army units on the front lines, pulling out some core units. Makes sense. French morale suffers from the fall of Poland. Germany celebrates the return of Danzig. British Expeditionary Force has arrived in France. I mean, we took Poland faster than historically was the case. Mainly because we used the armor to sort of thrust through the enemy flank and go for the vital objective, which is kind of, where you get the feel of this game being kind of World War II-y is when you get stuff like that, where you get those armored thrusts that have multiple attacks that kind of almost do a breakthrough type mechanic. Okay, so send you for... Okay, so it's basically saying, hey, raid enemy convoys. Now that the Polish campaign is over, we have an opportunity to adjust some of the details of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It's proposed that we offer to transfer Lithuania from our sphere of influence to the USSR. While this would enable the Soviets to occupy the country in due course, in return we'd ask the USSR to withdraw eastwards across the Vistula to the Bug River Sound line. It would put us in a much better position to attack the forces of Brest-Litovsk when we invade the USSR. If Stalin approves this proposal, he may not, it would also move the USSR 5% away from the Allies. So we can basically try and say, hey, we should readjust the border, which historically did occur, to give us a better position to attack the Soviets, but we'll give you Lithuania into your sphere. It can reduce the USSR's likelihood to join the Allies by 5%, which buys you, I don't know, a turn or two more before you have to invade the USSR, most likely. So I'll go ahead and say yes. I'm curious if Stalin will accept. Or maybe we don't find out for a turn or two, because nothing happened. All right, so we're up to 500 MPPs between the seized MPPs and the money that we actually gained from, from the conflict, from the regular income. Russia be Stalin. So now at this point, it's like, all right, well, it's October of 39. What do? Do you go for Norway? Do you go for Denmark? I think those are events that trigger. I'm not sure. You probably want to deploy west against the French before they can get too strong, right? You've also got some border fortifications with the Belgians. If we take a look at diplomacy right now, Bulgaria didn't move at all. We could spend some chits to try and get them to move more quickly. All that really does is open up the possibility of a move against Russia a little bit more quickly, potentially. Not so much with Bulgaria, but with Romania, certainly. But it helps the economy, lets you build things up, lets you spend on research and development. But yeah. So now would be the time where the Germans would start redeploying forces west to begin the invasions there. But we've been doing this game now for about another 40 minutes. So I think this is as good of a time as any to go ahead and switch over to the next Strategic Command game. So we have so far looked at Strategic Command World War II, War in the Pacific, Strategic Command World War II, War in Europe, and now we're going to jump ahead to personally my favorite Strategic Command game, Strategic Command World War I. So I'm going to go ahead and take a real quick break, step away for just a minute, and then we will open up the next game. I just need to stretch my legs, and then we will get going. As a reminder, this is a sponsored stream, so thank you to the folks at Matrix and Slytherin Games for sponsoring the stream. The Strategic Command series is on sale right now, so if you are interested in that, go ahead and check that out. There's a link in the chat for that as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the third game in the series for tonight's stream, Strategic Command World War I. This is, in my opinion, my favorite of the Strategic Command series because I feel like it is the game that is best suited to be represented in the game mode, right? The game mode has two basically it's I go, you go, right? And so I think the World War II game does a good job of trying to make things feel free-flowing. I think you saw that a little bit in the Polish campaign. But I do feel like in this game, with the system as it exists, it does a better job than any of the other series to really feel like the conflict it's trying to represent. As is the case with all the other Strategic Command games, you can play hot seat multiplayer, that system-based play-by-email inside the game, or single player. And so, of course, tonight we're going to go ahead and play by email. Now, there are a number of DLCs with this game as well. So Call to Arms is the base game, which looks at 1914 through to the end of the war, the Grand Campaign, if you will. 1914 March to Paris is actually a daily operational turn. So this one's the big strategic map. You see all the nations, you do all the things. But 1914 March to Paris is a zoomed-in look of just the French front, day-by-day turns, almost more like an operational than a strategic game. And so it changes the scale a bit, and it's really an interesting look. We've done a series on the channel about that in the past, and personally, I enjoyed that. You've also got the 1914 version. I think it's the Triple Alliance version. So hey, what if the Italians actually honored the alliance and fought with the Central Powers? 1917 sort of mid-war scenario. You start late. You start with a lot of the technology already in place. Maybe we'll do that. You've also got the 1918 Ludendorff offensive. Again, more of a zoomed-in look, kind of the same as the French one. And then you've got 1913 Great Game, which is a community pack scenario here, made by a community member. And then I assume this is kind of like the 1938 scenario in the World War II game, where you actually get a little bit of influence over building up and preparing your forces for the war, so a little bit more flexibility. And then you've got DLCs here for the Shadow of the Tsar, if you purchase those DLCs from the Empire in Turmoil, which looks at the Soviet Civil War, or the Russian Civil War. 1916 Big Push, 1916 African Campaign, Mesopotamia Campaign, Hindenburg's Glory, what is this, Eastern Front? East Prussia. Balkan League War, which was a totally separate war, and the Broken League, which I believe that's the Second Balkan League War. These are part of Empires in Turmoil, these DLC items. But you can see here we've got 1914 Call to Arms. I suppose that's as good of a spot to join as any. I know we're doing a lot of these early war campaigns, but I think they're more interesting to show you the mechanics of the game and whatnot. So we'll go ahead and jump in and play. Actually, no. Let's do Fate. Let's do Fate of Nations. So the U.S. is already in the war, sort of the last gasp, and I think this will do a good job of showing you the actual sort of way that trench warfare works in the game. I guess we'll keep up the string of playing as the Germans here. U.S. declares war on Germany. President Wilson signs resolution. Army of 500,000 men to be raised. It's a nice little loading screen. Strange craft seen in northern waters. Okay, so the enemy may launch a naval blockade to stop neutral shipping. Yeah, that's already ongoing. You can place minefields to try and impede the flow of merchant shipping. Without assistance, our Austro-Hungarian ally will struggle with fighting against Italy, Russia, and the Entente forces in the Balkans. We should send help to them. Well, actually, this is our good chance to look at the convoy map, which is relevant in all the other games too, but... Well, the Americans are already at war, so unrestricted submarine warfare feels like a good idea. Also, interesting in World War I, importing goods through the Netherlands is actually very important for the Germans. The British sort of cracked down on that later in the war, but it's certainly important to be able to get like food and other important resources that we need. So keep the Dutch friendly so that they don't tell us, hey, our ports are closed to you. So you can see it's snowing. It's winter, 1917, January. We've got different aviation units here. We've got some rail guns, and we've got troops that are all dug in fortifications here. So the way entrenchment tech works is as you advance your entrenchment techs, your entrenchments can become bigger and bigger, just in normal hexes without actually sending engineers there when the units dig in when they're stationary here. So it helps to create trenches where, there aren't, if you fight the 1914 scenario, there's no trenches, there's no real entrenchment, you can move more freely on your drive to Paris, whereas now you can see in 1917, everything is a trench, everything is dug in, which makes infantry assaults very difficult. And again, you don't really have a lot of armor at this point. The Allies are starting to get armor, the Germans less so, but there's no real armor to try and break through here, so that's a bit of a challenge. If we zoom out here, we can see that the Italians are also fighting against the Entente powers. So far, it looks like it's just Hungary, but the game is recommending Germany send troops, Austria-Hungary. The game is recommending to send troops to help them. Meanwhile, you've got Bulgaria and the Ottomans in the war here against the Russians in the east. Actually, it's the Romanians in the east. And then the Russian lines here. Again, a lot of troops dug in, but you can see why the Eastern Front has a little bit more mobility because you don't quite have the same troops crammed in here as you do in the West. In the West, there's, multiple layers of troops in places, rather than just one line. Some places there are more than one. In the East, it's more open. In theory, you could have a chance to break through. And you can also research, do R&D to get better infantry weapons that can, unlock the ability to have more effective infantry tactics. Infantry warfare technology or sort of doctrine influences your infantry's ability to effectively fight and what have you. We've got a lot more specialized equipment in the West as well. If we go up here, we can see wars in mid-swing. So the Ottomans, not so happy right now. You can see that they've got 68 national morale. Austro-Hungarians, even worse, 37%. Meanwhile, the Germans are at 70. The French are at 50, and the British are at 70. So those are all things to consider. The British have landed, it looks like at no, this isn't Salamanca. I think Gallipoli's already been withdrawn from by this point. But you've got some British troops here fighting in Greece to try and, obviously break through there as well. We could use these German troops at Bitola to try and get in behind the British lines and maybe have some success there. Oh, no! I just advanced some Austro-Hungarian troops and they ran into some Italian troops in Greece and got pretty badly shot up here. We've got minefields here that help impede naval units. Alright, so we moved General Cadio's corps here south of Salonika. But Salonika will probably draw supply anyway because it is a port hex. But in theory, we're driving on Athens, which is already in the war with the Allies. The Serbians have a remnant army down here. Serbia's already been overrun. And when you attack, you also do reduce entrenchments of troops there. So we attacked there, didn't do any damage, but we did reduce the entrenchments of the Orient Corps here at the French. So this is, again, it's much more World War I-y than you would, it's slow slogs trying to break through enemy lines and things like that. So we can use artillery as well to try and break through and bombard units. Artillery also reduces entrenchments. Probably wise not to attack with the Austro-Hungarians right there. And I believe if you use aviation here, you can scout out the enemy and then hit him with artillery, and it's more effective. So you can see this little red hex around here means we've scouted them, which in theory should make the attack more effective, also make artillery more effective. Alright, so let's do this. Let's recon here. There's kind of an enemy unit and a salient here. Enemy interceptors. We do have escorts for our bombing strike. Or recon strike. Now we'll go ahead and hit it with artillery. Now, artillery is also represented differently in the World War I game. In the World War I game, you have a certain number of shells, which represent ammo. So that's this game's attempt to sort of reflect the critical shortage of ammunition that often would develop. So we've burned through a bunch of shells here. So our unit can keep attacking with its artillery until it runs out of shells. And right now we burn through all our shells. And it will replenish shells slowly, as you don't shoot them. Alright, so we tried to attack through the enemy lines here. Did a little bit of damage. Took damage ourselves. These guys have no entrenchments. I'm honestly kind of surprised our attacks aren't faring better. I can swap these units around. Part of it's also the enemy has defensive artillery firing to help them. So the enemy's burning through their own artillery ammo to keep our offensive at bay, but that was a largely ineffectual assault there on the Eastern Front. We could use, shipping also to try and reduce the enemy. We've got a large German high seas fleet. The enemy's got an overstrength unit here at Verdun. 120 morale at Verdun. Could try and target the British here. We could go for this little salient here, the Anzac Corps, 2nd Anzac Corps, to the west of Lille. Just use up the shells here. Should have actually done some recon for them first. Makes the artillery more effective too. So it does show you kind of how aviation is not just a sideshow thing, it is pretty important. Also, the more artillery you hit them with, it does influence their morale and effectiveness. So we've spent all that ammo for those artillery boys. And we'll recon the... do balloons recon? Doesn't look like it. Alright. These are all core units, so that's probably part of why they're not as effective in attacking. So, you can see, obviously, not a very... I'm trying to break through a major effort. 3 corps, all attacking along the line. We did some damage to the 2nd Anzac Corps, but we definitely didn't break through. So, it's a bit of a slog there. Now, that's the mid-war version of this. So that is something, if you're joining mid-war, it's harder to break through. It is, if you look at the call to arms scenario here, if we jump in, let's take a look and see how that's different from the 1914 scenario. Because the 1914 scenario plays very different, at least early on. Until you stagnate into your defensive fortifications, things play very, very differently. So we looked at that very briefly, of what the what the war looks like later on. And if you do the 1918 scenario also, you can jump straight in and have tanks. But if you look here, now we're deploying our forces here. So this is 1914. Most of our forces are being deployed. We can deploy them in the west, deploy them in the east, or in the south. So you can effectively choose a little bit more where you're going to deploy your troops. So do you want to do the Schlieffen plan? Do you want to do something else? We've already got some troops in place to do the Schlieffen plan, but we can reinforce that plan, right? We can send more troops here to try and reinforce our drive here in the west. Additionally, we could deploy some of these troops in the east to deal with the Soviets, or not Soviets, oh my goodness, the Russians, in the event that we're worried that they may attack East Prussia, because they could. Or we could deploy, I think the Hungarians have some additional troops they can deploy to deal with Serbia. But that being said, you can see here no massive fortifications. These troops aren't dug in. It is intended, in any event, to be a war maneuver. And so we do have cavalry units here, early war. We can see where we're going to deploy von Bülow. I already deployed those guys. So that's the German deployment phase, I guess. And that concludes that phase. So again, you could deploy those guys anywhere to try and speed up your attack. I guess the Austro-Hungarians don't have additional units to deploy. The British are not yet at war. And then again, you want to keep Holland on your good side. So if we go to diplomacy, it's also much more relevant in this game, right? The UK is 75% to the Entente, but they're not there yet. If we do declare war on Belgium, that will, obviously happen much more quickly. But I think if we're going to follow the Schlieffen plan, we've got to try and break through there as well. That may make the Netherlands mad at us. It may make, Switzerland and these other countries mad at us. But the UK is joining the Entente immediately upon my declaration of war with Belgium. We're going to go ahead and use our artillery here to try and weaken the fortress at Liege. There's also ground cover, too. So it's got entrenchments, but ground cover, I guess, is for units where you don't yet have... Oh, no, because these guys have entrenched. Oh, yeah. So if you're not in an actual fortification, you get ground cover. But in any event, so we're going to go ahead and try and roll over the troops at Liege. Alright, so we'll attack that fortification there in Belgium. See if we can take Brussels right away. Move up toward Antwerp. Use our cavalry to cover greater distance. Let's push toward this mine to the south of Brussels. Aw, I can't get there. I can get adjacent to Brussels, but I can't take Brussels. I shouldn't have spent all that cavalry movement points. I mean, the Schlieffen plan is alive and well, but Luxembourg is ours, for what it's worth. I don't want to force march, because force marching has major impacts to your effectiveness. Can any of these guys march up there? I'd force march into Brussels if I could do that, but... I should have been more careful with how I moved my units. Would have been nice. Okay. So we have begun the Schlieffen movement. I'm not going to move to the border here. I'm going to keep these troops in position. I can have them dig in a little bit. Although that takes time to build trenches here. Oh, actually, no. Those guys build right away. Okay. To get more elaborate entrenchments takes longer, but for the moment anyway, these guys who haven't moved can dig in. If you move, you can't entrench and move the same turn, but that should help if the enemy decides to attack us. At least for some of those guys. I'd like to move the troops into this Ardennes section. I feel like that would be nice and defensible, but... Alright, we'll move these headquarters units west to support the invasion into Belgium. Again, supplies becomes very important in the drive into Belgium here, but these guys should all be in good supply. 7 or above is generally a good rule of thumb of where you want to be. Most of our front with France is... I'm going to pull this cavalry out because I don't want them to be... Oh, they can move and entrench too? Nice. I thought you couldn't, but... Some of the units. I guess it depends on how many movement points you have left. So most of our border here is going to have entrenchments, which should help against the inevitable French counterattack. So you can see here, all these units here along from Metz south are all entrenched. Actually, north of Metz too. Alright, so we're swinging north. Move our helos down that way. Wow, helos? What am I talking about? The airplanes down that way. Now, having Holland be neutral is good, because it allows you to get additional economic benefit that you wouldn't get otherwise. But it is a challenge because it does create a bit of a bottleneck. It'd be nice to be able to swing through Holland. You can see why the Germans did that historically in World War II. Because I would love to flank through Holland, south of Rotterdam, to expand this front with the Belgians. But as it is, in particular, Maastricht here, this fortification really pinches off the advance through Belgium. And so, you know, I gotta live with it. But it does kind of suck. Alright, so we also have the Austro-Hungarians to worry about. Now, the Soviet... Why do I keep saying that? The Russians are certainly going to go ahead and attack. So we'll put some troops in Primsel, which is a key fortress town. And then we'll try and, I think, dig in other troops here. As best we can. Krakow is also a fortress town. But we need to... I'm not going to be, you know... I'm not going to be Conrad von Hotzendorf and try and assault into Russia. That feels unwise, should we say. I will try to defend where I think it makes sense to defend. While we push in Serbia. So we'll see where the Russians come. You know, can we do anything against the Serbians here? It'd be real nice to have some artillery. So we'll attack once there. It does reduce their entrenchments a little bit from 3 to 2. We did do some damage there. But not anywhere near enough. So we can't overrun the Serbians quite yet. Which is kind of historically accurate, but kind of sucks. I did force march that cavalry unit there. We're going to throw our German troops on the Russian border into their entrenchments. If they don't have any, we'll go ahead and build some. Okay. And that's, I'd say, a key difference between this game and the other games is the way the entrenchments work. I mean, it's very important to manage that. We do make a slight incursion into Polish Russia there. But we also got some German Marines over here, which I don't think we're going to use, but... Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Undo. I don't know why we would keep troops on the border with Denmark. Alright, we don't have any money to spend on this first turn, so I can't really do anything with research or diplomacy or other things like that. So, you know, we've seen the research tags here, but there's nothing to do there. Diplomacy, not, you know, no money to spend on it, so we'll just end the turn and see what the Allies do. I'm assuming we'll see furious counterattacks by the French, but we'll see. Luxembourg surrenders, we get a little bit of money from that. Whose flagship is the Goeben battlecruisers, currently in the Med, sailing toward Constantinople. It's recommended that the Goeben continue on to Constantinople, take into service with the Ottomans. If we decide not to send it to Constantinople, they'll sail to Pola to join the Austro-Hungarian Navy. Send it, yes, because it'll give you a big diplomatic boost with the Ottomans. The 4th and 7th Corps of our 2nd Army are currently en route to Novi Sad and Temshichburg, near the Serbian border, where they'll deploy shortly to take part in the invasion of Serbia. However, deploying them there may leave us with insufficient forces facing the Russians. Sending them to fight against the Russians will delay their arrival several weeks. So the the Austro-Hungarians kind of went back and forth in fighting Russia versus Serbia and where they wanted to deploy their strength. The offensive into Serbia did not have sufficient strength, and as a result, it failed. We're going to go ahead and deploy them against Serbia. We can always deploy German troops to deal with the Russians. And we'll get them more quickly, too. Another headquarters there, also very valuable to getting our supply up. French mobilization is underway. Also, the other thing is this game will have units deploy gradually over the first few turns. So it does represent mobilization occurring over time, which helps to sort of give you the story, if you will, of the attempt of the Schlieffen Plan anyway to knock out the French before they're fully mobilized. And also specifically to knock out the French before the Russians are fully mobilized. Alright, so the Russians have advanced into Austria-Hungary, going for the one oil field we've got there along our eastern border. The garrison at Belgrade just upgraded, so they replaced their losses and got more troops. Hopefully that means they're less experienced, though, and our troops will fare better in the next turn and the next attack. I don't have a ton of optimism there, but who knows? Maybe with the additional forces that we just deployed to their border, we'll get a better result. I'm kind of surprised the Serbians aren't launching a very aggressive counterattack. Rivers are also very important in this game. You know, geography in all these games is relevant. So you see rivers on the map, and it's like, okay, well, I can just move through them. But when you're attacking into an opponent hex where there's a river, it actually results in, you know, considerably more casualties for you than if you're attacking from dry land to dry land. Also, you can see there near, is it Gundenberg, I think it was? The Soviets attacked one of the German corps in eastern Prussia. They lost 3 chits of strength. We lost 0. A big part of that was the fact that we dug in. But full-fledged Soviet invasion here into eastern Prussia. Also, they're deploying along the border with Austria-Hungary. So we have decided to deploy a lot of our Austrian strength against Serbia. We will need to try and knock Serbia out of the war sooner rather than later if we want to have a chance of surviving that onslaught. Because the Austro-Hungarians had disaster after disaster in 1914 against the Russians. If the Germans hadn't had the success they had at Tannenberg, you know, it's very possible the Russians could have broken the Austrians earlier in the war. They took horrendous casualties. I mean, everybody did early on, but refugees from Galicia spreads fear through Austria-Hungary. Hungary. Okay, so they did take those oil fields. The British decided to seize the Sultan Osman I, which results in the Ottomans getting really mad at them, which will push them toward our side in the conflict here. Now, in order to win early in the war for the Central Powers, it is key that they keep moving. And so that is, you know, the fact that we didn't take Brussels in day one it's going to be a problem, because if we want to try and break through, we really need to have more rapid success than I think we had the first turn. Meanwhile, given our weakness in East Prussia, we could greatly strengthen our position there by bringing Paul von Hindenburg out of retirement and giving him a field command. Okay. It'll cost 200 MPPs for over 4 turns. Is there a reason you'd say no? Other than the fact that it costs money, I don't think there's a reason you'd say no. I don't think it actually takes units away that we're going to deploy in France. So, yeah. Huge numbers of refugees have fled across areas of fighting and need to be fed and clothed. Providing them food will give you 2,000 national morale as the Austrians. Meanwhile, if you say no, it'll hurt your morale by 2,000. I guess if we say that's a pretty huge hit. I mean, Austria-Hungary's national morale is 32,000, so that would have, I mean, that would have been, what, 5? I can't do math. More than 5%. All right, so the Belgians move troops back into Brussels here. I'm gonna try and I'm not bypassing Brussels per se, but I am trying to keep the pressure up in our drive on Paris. Alright, so we've taken Reims. We're actually pretty damn close to Paris already. We've surrounded Brussels. Cavalry attacks Brussels. Enemy contact! Wow, I rode my cavalry way too far out ahead of the front lines here. Got them. They took 50% casualties, but they did get within 2 hexes of Paris. Alright, so Brussels is ours. Go for the Belgian headquarters unit here. Try and take Lille. Alright, I'm going to swap hit can I hit so Lille did not fall. Darn. I was hoping to take Lille this turn. That would have been big for us. But I won't get there. We'll try and extend our advance. I mean, Verdun is a fortress, so we probably won't take that. But we can shorten our lines here and still entrench these troops along the border if we just advance and entrench. Advance and entrench. I'm not sucking them in like we would have, you know, ideally liked. But, you know, we're sort of falling into the trap that the Germans historically did, trying a double envelopment. But advancing 1 hex and then immediately digging in should protect us a little bit against the counterattack while also protecting our borders. Alright, we attack this French force here to the north of Verdun. Kind of bypassing Antwerp. Kind of, anyway. I'm kind of bummed that I didn't take Lille or destroy the headquarters unit there. Headquarters units are pretty darn important in this game. We'll use our cavalry to guard the flank near Antwerp so that they can't drive down and retake Brussels right away. Operate this artillery to the... I can't even operate it to the front. I can force march it to the front. I wonder if you force march artillery if it doesn't... Alright, stack those headquarters up to try and get more supply. The Vanguard, this cavalry unit's probably going to get destroyed in the Allied counterattack, but Brussels is taken. Belgium is sort of knocked out of the war. Their remnant force will keep fighting. They'll actually probably move to Antwerp, because that's an alternate capital. Meanwhile, can we take Serbia? Can we take... Maybe. Well, if we got better... die rolls, perhaps. We're not going to take it after all of this effort. Oh, maybe we will. We got it! We should be able to move a unit in there. So Belgrade's ours. Serbia won't surrender yet, though. They have an alternate capital back at Niš. But it should help our morale, at least. We took incredibly high casualties, but it should also help the Austro-Hungarian morale as well. Meanwhile, you can see here considerable Russian forces pushing in to our lines. We're going to pull these guys back. Kind of a strategic withdrawal. Entrench the troops along the lines here. Colma is a little vulnerable in this position. We can actually move this infantry over here and entrench it. We can use the terrain where they, you know, hopefully to minimize their... Is there a... I wish there was a hotkey for entrenchments. Cavalry's not ideal to fight with on the defensive, but should at least slow the Russian advance. Counterattack near Gumdinen, if that's how you pronounce it. Soviet 20th Corps there's in a bit of rough shape. Memel, I'm not really going to try and hold too hard. We'll just reinforce there and hang out. East Prussia, I think, will remain on the defensive. I would be curious. So, a slight jaunt into Poland before immediately falling back with this cavalry unit here. I like, if I'm going to put cavalry units on the front line, to have them set back ones so that the enemy would have to advance into, like, this scenario, right, where they could attack Krakow from multiple sides, or the unit, the first corps here, but they could only attack the first cavalry from one direction. So they might inflict heavy damage on the cavalry, because cavalry is relatively weak, but they won't, you know, overrun it. Alright. I said I was going to remain on the defensive of East Prussia and then move to corps immediately forward. It's like, well, it looks like there's a vulnerable garrison at Lutz, but then we run straight into the 2nd Cavalry Corps. At least we can entrench. Alright, I think that's it. Well, maybe not. Maybe we move these guys at Hamburg forward. Move them by rail. 18 MPPs to get them into the front line. Give us more troops in the push on Paris. And we can spend research points like on infantry weapons to upgrade that, 125. You have a maximum amount of research funding, so right now we're funding 400. You can spend up to 1,600 for the Germans. Industrial technology also seems relevant. So go ahead and spend those 2 chits. Didn't spend anything on diplomacy there, but you can see here, Italy is here. They're neutral totally. I don't know if you can really get them to swing fully to the Entente in this or not, or the Central Powers in this or not. Ottomans are at 37%, and they'll sort of gradually go your way. It's very expensive to try and move them more quickly. Same for Bulgaria, is cheaper, but eventually they'll probably swing your way. The Netherlands you want to keep on your side. Austria-Hungary has 200 points, so let's go ahead and spend. Let's get a couple of mountain corps here for them. I can only afford 1, but still useful, I think, to get 1 going. And they take a while to produce here, so you can see production delay 3 months. Number of units you can build is up to 3. So, all right, so let's see what happens here. Germany celebrates the capture of Brussels. Serbian morale falls by the fall of Belgrade. They move their capital to Niš. Belgium moves their capital to Antwerp. Baron Konrad von Wagenheim, our ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, reports from Constantinople that the Ottoman army is not yet ready for war. We can spend 200 MPPs over the course of 4 turns at 50 per turn, and we'll give Lehman von Sanders logistical support. Yes, we should do that. And the Ottomans like the fact that we are giving them support. Polish Supreme National Committee are offering their services in our fight for Russia. Given the number of likely Polish volunteers, this would form a half-strength detachment, which could deploy at Koszk in early September. So, Okay. So this helped stimulate Polish nationalism and demands for self-determination, which helps undermine Austria-Hungary. So we're not going to do that. Bulgaria is like, interesting. The Guillermin arrives in Constantinople. French mobilization continues. They get more units to deploy. So each time you get that little notice, they're getting more units. Serbian and Turkestan units are arriving in Moscow. Germany's getting more units as well, deploying as their mobilization continues. So we launched our attack before we were fully deployed. We just got, wow, 6 more corps? Austria-Hungary also getting more units. Oh, great. One of them deployed on the front line. They're going to get wrecked by the Russians. That isn't great. But again, you can also see why, like, okay, so we made some advances, we moved some, but units are going to entrench, and so if you don't attack a unit and it doesn't move, it entrenches, and then if you don't attack it for a second turn, it entrenches further, and that's how you get these lines to stagnate into what we saw in the 1917 scenario from where we're at today. So we can see here the Allies, or Entente, are making their moves. I'm actually pretty happy with how quickly we took Belgrade. I don't, you know, the enemy's going to dig in. There's a river, I think, just south of Belgrade. It's going to make it very difficult to try and defeat them. The French are moving their navy against ours? That's risky. British too? Are we going to get like a major battle near Heligoland? So far I'm just seeing cruisers, but these are pocket battleships in the port there, but we've got our dreadnoughts just to the east through the Kiel Canal. We can move those guys straight through and engage them. Now, if the enemy has battleships around there, I probably don't want to do that. We haven't really talked a lot about naval combat, but it kind of works the same way that land combat works in this game. Obviously, sinking ships is a big impact on morale. And then there's also the blockade aspect, so we can take a look at the convoy map here in a sec. Alright, so the British are actually flying some flights out of England. Okay. And they're attacking the head of my cavalry columns, which makes sense. Those are vulnerable. They're not very good on the defensive. So they just destroyed one of my cavalry units there in Belgium. You can see the Russians here continuing to attack in Austria-Hungary. I'm assuming that lead corps will get destroyed. But I suppose it'll spoil any real advance against me on that trench line I made to the south, because, you know, half their invading force just spent their movement points attacking there. Meanwhile, counterattack against my cavalry here at Marasant. We do get a little bit of artillery support to defend them, but it's not going to be enough to save them. Yep. So we lost 2 cavalry corps this turn. Meanwhile, Belgian counterattack near Belgrade. Not Belgian. Serbian counterattack near Belgrade. We get some movements into East Prussia. I mean, our reserves are deploying Sev as we speak. You see more deploying every turn. But a lot of movement. The front line didn't move too much in Austria this turn. Probably formed that salient near Lemberg fell, so that's going to make the Austrians not too happy. Romania swings to the Entente because of it. Somewhat, anyway. I don't think they're ready to join the war yet, but German mobilization continues. We got that unit deployed in Strasbourg. They're starting the blockade of Germany. Japan declares war on the Central Powers. German Samoa is going to get taken. Which is not really on the map here. You can see we lost 1 Austrian corps, 2 German corps. Mobilization continues. So this is where it talks about the naval blockade. If you get ships along some of these national morale objectives, it will influence the blockade. So if you put like raiding ships, submarines, or even surface raiders here, it'll influence trade and national morale for the British. So, you know, obviously that represents the campaign against them. If you get ships along the blockade route for the British, it helps to blockade the Germans and influences national morale here. So the more units they have enforcing the blockade, the more it impacts our national morale, representing, you know, the blockade being more or less effective. So it does feel like I probably won't get much closer to Paris. I know we're like right here, but you can also see that like our attack is going to start petering out a little bit. These frontline units are already kind of exhausted. I can try and push through here where the enemy cavalry is and maybe make some progress. So shatter that enemy cavalry unit, but they're already digging in on this line behind them. So we're going to try and break the British here, but you can see that's going to be difficult to try and do. Meanwhile, we did cut off a small pocket here in the north. Alright, shattered the core here near the Ardennes at Sedan. Try and break through the line here where the British are. We did drive them back, wow. I don't know that I'd say we unbuttoned the line, but we did at least push through one of their troops. So you can see, like, you can still make some progress. But units are going to gradually get more and more dug in, more, you know, stronger and stronger. And we do have some of these new units which just got raised, which in theory could help. Probably also want to reinforce some of these units. I wonder if Antwerp slowly loses supplies over time. I'm not sure. I would assume maybe? It's kind of a thorn in our side. Anyway, guys, we've been going on this particular... You can see, obviously, the push south to try and get to Nice should be increasingly difficult. But we've been going for over 40 minutes in this particular Strategic Command game, and this is a sponsored stream to show all of the Strategic Command games off. So we are going to go ahead and, you know, wrap this particular game up, and we will take a look at the final game that we're going to look at tonight, the Strategic Command American Civil War, which is kind of unique in that it's sort of the fire, you know, the musket era. It's the only musket era game in this series, but that's what we're going to take a look at next here. So let's go ahead and... So we are looking at Strategic Command American Civil War. Now the screen in front of you is War in the Americas, which is a DLC for it, which allows you to play through the Spanish-American War. And there's also a number of other DLCs with the game as well, which I do own personally. But you've got like a Paraguay, you've got basically a DLC for the wars in the Americas, which represent a lot of different conflicts that occur in the Americas around the same time period. But the base game, Strategic Command American Civil War, looks at the American Civil War, shocking, I know, with a number of different scenarios. You can do an 1861 start, a 62, a 63, sort of the Gettysburg campaign version of it, and works the same way that the other Strategic Command games do. I go, you go, turns. You have, I think they're all the same turn length. I don't think there's any operational campaigns. Oh, well, there's the 1870 version of the game, which is for the Franco-Prussian War, which you can fight also. That's daily turns. And then there's also the Imperial Sunrise, I believe, DLC, which looks at the Russo-Japanese War. So you've got a wide variety of games with the American Civil War game. But we are going to play, let's do Scott's Great Snake. Let's do an early war, but still early enough that we can go ahead and kind of like show off the forces are mobilized, but the war isn't yet, decided. You can see your victory conditions for this version. Confederacy has surrendered or their fighting spirit is below 10% for the Union. Union surrenders or their fighting spirit is below 10% for the Confederacy. Minor victories, the Union holds D.C., and then Richmond, Charleston, Atlanta, Montgomery, or New Orleans, any of the three. Confederate minor, Richmond, and then hold those key cities for themselves. Let's go ahead and play this one. We're going to play this one from the point of view of the Union. But yeah, apparently Mexico, France, and Spain can also all get involved. Great Britain, too, depending on stuff. I think this Civil War game does a very unique job of modeling the War on the Rivers, which I think might be the best modeling of the War on the Rivers that I've ever seen. But anyway, this scenario advice, strategic advice. Mr. President, with hopes of a quick victory dashed at Bull Run, we must now prepare for a long and bitter struggle. Scott's Anaconda Plan represents our best chance to achieve victory. Every ship we send to the blockade to the southern ports will prevent the rebels from importing arms and discourage European powers from intervening. Furthermore, our armies are now in position to seize Norfolk and New Orleans, which I recommend be done immediately. The Army of the Tennessee has achieved a great success in recent weeks, destroying Forts Henry and Donaldson and capturing the city of Nashville. General Grant believes that our next objective should be the city of Memphis, which would allow us to control much of the Mississippi River. The Army of the Potomac has been undergoing extensive training since the Battle of Bull Run. Reinforced and ready, I recommend using this force to strike the rebel capital of Richmond from the east, landing at Fortress Monroe and marching along the James River. Major General George B. McClellan. Okay, so the Union has a number of units to deploy here. We've got 3 corps, it looks like, and then a siege artillery unit. Corps represent armies in the other strategic games, so they're the 4 unit, the stronger of the units. So we can deploy these corps, I suppose, near D.C., or actually near Annapolis in Maryland. Oh, actually, no, D.C. Duh, what am I talking about? We could deploy them further west, couldn't we? Yeah, we could also deploy them in the west if we wanted to support the drive south into the interior. How many corps do we have in the east? Second corps under Hancock's got to be deployed. Although it's not Hancock yet, probably it's Couch or something like that. Deploy them there. Siege artillery. I feel like siege artillery might be more beneficial out west. I don't know. Maybe use it to remove some of the river forts. I didn't deploy the second corps before. I deployed someone else. Let's deploy one of these guys at Annapolis, maybe, to support the amphibious attacks. Well, I probably need another headquarters unit to do that effectively. So here you go. We've deployed those units that we start with for the Union. We also have 900 MPPs to buy new stuff. So we can go ahead and purchase stuff. You can see here we can buy a division, which is the same as a corps in the other units. We can buy a corps, which is the same as an army in the others. Apparently there's also mountain divisions, rangers, which are kind of like skirmishers and cavalry, marines, engineers, cavalry divisions, siege artillery, railroad batteries, armored trains, balloons, and so you would think the Civil War, not a lot of unit variety. Well, that would not be the case in this game. Additionally, there's ironclads, monitors, ships of the line, frigates, gunboats, river ironclads, timberclads, and gunboats. River ironclads seem like they'd be useful, so go ahead and do that. Engines influence, your maneuverability, and then weapons, obviously the effectiveness that you can do stuff. So river ironclads are my priority. We'll go ahead and buy a bunch of those. We're going to control that river. And then we'll do cavalry division. You can see we'll get these different units at different periods. We've also got some sort of, what are those? No, gunboats are these little 2 icon things. So they're kind of like, I'm assuming converted merchantmen. All right, meanwhile, where is the enemy? We could go down the peninsula here. We do have a brigade down here near Williamsburg. Also, one of the big differences with this game is naval units. So we sort of saw blockade in the World War I version of the game. But in the American Civil War game, each one of these hexes that have a little hash represents a blockade of a different objective. So right now we're blockading. We've got units adjacent to Norfolk, so we're reducing trade that comes in there. But each one of the Confederate ports down here can have blockade hexes. Additionally, if we occupy enemy forts like Pulaski, it will effectively blockade Savannah. If we were to take, well, I guess Charleston's a bad example, but essentially there's different forts you can take which blockade ports. You also can put units on different trade routes to prevent European mobilization, which sort of is a political aspect. Each one of these trade routes you can have ships on as well to raid shipping and prevent blockade runners from effectively getting through there. And then there's also, you can travel, off map, if you will, around Florida to go ahead and do that. Keep all units at least 4 hexes away from Havana to prevent Spanish mobilization. So Havana, obviously Cuba's a Spanish colony right now. And then we've got a bunch of naval assets in the south here. Some transports, which are looking at trying to take New Orleans. So we've got a couple of blockade runner units. There's one blockade runner unit down here. But you can see the rivers are a very important way this game unfolds. So let's kind of show that a little bit. Let's go ahead. We've got an enemy blockade runner down here. Can we go ahead and destroy this guy? We've got a ironclad, river ironclad. We'll go against the German, or not the German, against the Confederate ironclad here. Now, ironclads versus ironclads are effective, but ironclads versus other ships are not. So let's move our... Alright, so I'm going to move my frigate here against this river ironclad. Frigate's not very effective against ironclads. Obviously, they don't have iron hulls, so they're not going to be as effective. Go ahead and try and land these Marines here. Oops. Shouldn't have gone adjacent to the fort. Did it again. I'm so smart. Alright, there's other enemy ships around New Orleans. Oops. Alright, so we destroyed the fort there at New Orleans and took the city. So that'll be a huge boon for us. All these enemy ships will be in trouble. Our frigates cannot travel up the river, so that's sort of a lesson. Gunboats can move up the river. Frigates cannot. One of the things I really like about this game in terms of how it models river combat is if you actually, you can bypass forts. So like one of the big things historically that would occur is gunboats like this. They wouldn't just sail up and destroy the fort. They'd actually go beyond that. So you could, in theory, take a convoy and then sail past a fort. You would take damage as you try and sail past the fort, but you could bypass it. Now, I can't here because the enemy actually has ships directly below the fort. So in this case, I do have to attack the fort directly until we destroy it, which we just did between Payne's division and the ironclad here. But now we can move these guys down to try and clear the fort here. Sank an enemy, or shattered. It said shattered, but they're still there. An enemy gunboat. But yeah, like for example, if you want to run past an enemy unit, you can do that. You just move right through their zone of control. You do typically take some casualties, but you can do that. And it allows you to gain control over aspects of the river. So it's a good tactic to use Because rivers are also important in terms of supply and the ability to move troops back and forth. You can cut supply off by, controlling the rivers. They do represent hexes here. So we take a look here. We can actually, if we push this south, it moderately improves the supply that will exist next turn. But you can, move gunboats down these rivers, and it allows you to kind of exert control, prevent units as easily moving back and forth across, lines. So we got Grant here. I'm curious what they've got at Murfreesboro. I'm guessing they've got something. Yep, cavalry regiment. 3rd Division. Ugh. Ran right into an enemy division. New Madrid will be ours. We've surrounded you between the river and our land forces. We've cut the Confederate division or brigade off here. So presumably we will be able to attack it effectively next turn. Maybe even this turn. We can just move these guys up here, shatter the enemy division there, or brigade there, and take it. So that'll help our supply situation there. And then advance south. So units do still exist sort of in a frontline situation, I guess, the way that they do in the other games. Which is definitely, a little bit different in terms of a typical horse and musket game. But I really do, again, the way that it represents naval units exerting pressure across rivers, the way that rivers are used, or even coastal fortifications are used to provide trade and supply, I think is a well-done modeling of the Civil War. We just took Norfolk, which should be a nice little fighting spirit. And then we've got our ironclad. We've got the Monitor coming down here. Just destroyed an enemy gunboat flotilla here off of Fort Monroe. So we don't really need to blockade Norfolk once we take it. I also really like the way that the game emphasizes taking or exerting pressure on the enemy coastal forts. There's some events early in the game where you can take different ports, and it's really useful to sort of convey the importance of naval operations along the coastal waterways, because the more of these you strangle off, the worse the enemy trade gets, the harder it is to avoid the blockade, the more pressure it puts on the Confederate economy. And I think it does a really good job modeling the importance of coastal operations in the war that I think most games kind of neglect, frankly. All right, so the Confederates are trying to push south of D.C., and my corps are just running into these Confederate corps. I should use my cavalry to scout, and there I can see where the enemy is and avoid any surprises. But the land combat works kind of the way the other strategic command games do. I think where the Civil War game really stands out, like I said, is that naval aspect. So we took New Orleans. That should be a big deal in terms of national morale. I'm assuming Fort Jackson will get destroyed by the fact that we took it. They destroy the fort down river. I guess I can try and destroy it anyway. But let's just see what happens. Let's end the turn and see what happens. Destruction of Fort Johnson reduces Confederate fighting spirit. Confederate fighting spirit falls due to the loss of New Orleans. Also due to the loss of Norfolk. And we celebrate because we took New Orleans. Volunteer Infantry Cavalryman Fort in California, known as the California Column. Yes. Blockade runners diverted as Union forces approach New Orleans. So blockade runners are moving to Belize City, I guess. European support for the Confederacy drops following the occupation of Norfolk. So again, the more ports and things like that you occupy, it influences the likelihood of Europeans coming in on the side of the Confederacy. Likewise, Confederate land victories will influence their willingness to come to your aid. Meanwhile, a bunch of unrest in Kentucky here. I didn't look at partisan warfare a lot, actually, when we looked at the World War II game. So let's go ahead and take a look at it now, because it is relevant in this one very much. So when you hold P down... Oh, sorry, it's still... AI's still moving. So they're going to try and bombard our ground troops with their naval assets. But for the most part, they're just going to retreat upriver. Or maybe not. They're going to actually move south. So they damage those... they destroy a division of my Marines with naval bombardment. Well, darn. Alright, so the Virginia doesn't really have anywhere to go. They just destroyed a gunboat flotilla of ours with their ironclad, but they've got to get out of there because they have nowhere to base that. It can't move upriver up the James toward Richmond because its draft is too deep. Yeah. Alright, just waiting for the Confederates to finish their movements. Where's the Monitor going? Or the Merrimack going? You can actually see their naval force moved past our naval force on the river, and as a result, there was sort of passing fire. I think the thing that really appeals to me with this game on the naval side of things is by being able to move past forts on the rivers like that, it envisions in my head like the Vicksburg campaign, you know, where where Grant sort of snuck gunboats down past the barrels of the guns over the heights near Vicksburg. Sort of that ability to slide in under a fort. Forts aren't these impermeable objects. They can influence what is directly around them, but that doesn't mean you don't have mobility and the ability to push past them. And I think that's one of the things I really like about the way that forts are modeled in this game. You know, it's not like in the World War II or World War I version of the game where the fort is immovable, but you can't, like, move through it, per se. Whereas in this, you can, because they don't exert enough influence to be able to completely stop you. They just hinder you. Also, for what it's worth, different parts of the map kind of campaign differently. So in the east, you tend to have much better supply than in the west, which means you can campaign larger units more aggressively as field armies. As you move further west and supplies get worse, you tend to use smaller units because you don't have as good a supply, because you don't have, you don't want to invest huge resources out in New Mexico per se, but it's that balance of, do I have enough to win here? Because there's a New Mexico theater in this game, which very much is kind of a sideshow, but also kind of important from like a fighting spirit point of view. And for what it's worth, in this version of the game, fighting spirit replaces national morale. But we can see here the Confederates are actually very active in this version, and it's a little bit more free-flowing too, because it's a very large map for this game. But actually, the fort south of New Orleans didn't surrender, as far as we can tell so far. Union raiders are disrupting convoys. Skirmishes fought in Stanwix Station in California. And that does it for that turn. So we lost a brigade and a gunboat. But you can see here MPPs 12, 4, 12, 5, all influenced by our ships on the convoy route. And you can put multiple ships on the same convoy route to fully strangle it out, which becomes easier the more ports you take. So it really does represent sort of that gradual strangling of the South. We got a lot of intelligence. New gunboat in New York. But let's go ahead. Are these troops or gunboats? Gunboats. Let's see if we can push up the river a little bit further. So we'll attack there. Alright, there you go. So we destroyed the enemy ship south of Fort Jackson. I can't move my frigates up the river. I want to move them up the river. But we destroyed the fort at least. So we must be shattering their morale, and that's why they're retreating, because... There you go. Alright, so we're pushing up toward Baton Rouge, but we've already taken New Orleans. We've got a garrison unit there. We can try and push our gunboats up as well. Also, by putting ships here, prevents European mobilization. We talked a little bit about it, but you can see diplomacy here. UK is 1% toward the Confederates, France 1%, Spain 2%. That's influenced by battlefield stuff. There's also the Apaches, and then the Pueblo. The Pueblo can move to the side of the Union. If we take a look here and we zoom out a little bit, we can go to the New Mexico territory, and we can see, like, there's fighting here under Canby, which historically was true. There was fighting there. And so we can advance to try and take over El Paso down here in Texas. That theater goes all the way there. But then there's also sort of an off-map movement perspective. You don't march fully across the whole map. You can use these little hexes with arrows to move more quickly. And then if we go back to the Mississippi River, it's St. Louis up there, we've got our ironclads here. But again, naval assets, while they do exert pressure just like forts, they lose, influence as well. So this gunboat went all the way down here near Decatur, Alabama, but now, like, all of the influence along the river here was lost between Florence and Iuka. I'm assuming the Confederates moved some troops through here, and so now these guys are down here with effectively no ability to draw more supply, but they are still full supply temporarily. So we can go ahead and swing these guys north. We can go ahead and scout a little bit along the river. These sort of irregulars at Murfreesboro just getting cracked on. We'll go ahead and take Murfreesboro from the Confederates as Grant moves south. You can see there's a corps unit actually moving out that way. Meanwhile, these Confederate gunboats in our rear shouldn't last long. We've got ironclads here. We should be able to clear the river of their presence. And again, if we want, we could try and move these guys down past... There's a fort here north of Memphis, so if we want to move these guys south, we could. They do take damage. And so... Oh, I get myself destroyed, didn't I? Oh, no, not quite. But in theory, that would also allow you to move troops. You can move troops on transports, right? So, like, I can put these guys in an amphibious transport here, and I can move them... just past the fort too, so you can do the Grant land the troops south of Vicksburg thing, and whatnot. Now, scouting is really important. So, like, you've seen me many times in this short little video, just again right there, run into enemy troops I didn't see, and so they get to attack me first. So using your cavalry, which has a view range of 2, is very important to allowing you to fight effectively. Unlike what I'm doing currently, where I just run blindly forward. That's another thing that's different in this game. The sighting range in these versions of the game are much reduced, which means you really do need to use your cavalry effectively to fight effectively. Okay, Gainesville. Again, just running pell-mell straight into the enemy. No, don't mind us. But once you spot them, you can fight much more effectively, as we just destroyed an enemy brigade out west here, near Curtis's lines. There's also some Native American troops here, some irregulars. And taking these different forts in the west is also important. But again, I think where this game really shines is the amphibious stuff. Shatter that fort south of Fort Monroe. Can I scout? I can use balloons to do some scouting, right? Oof. That attack didn't go well. Where did the Virginia move anyway? Oh, enemy contact. Ironclads tend to not be as effective out in the open ocean, too. Something to consider. Alright, use our cavalry there to attack that enemy division. Move our corps up here to try and knock that enemy division out. Got him. Whitting's division is gone, General Sir. I also feel like in this game, rivers matter a lot more in terms of impeding movement and being effective at fighting. So I personally enjoy that. I think that's a good representation of, in terms of like moving freely too. Ewell's division. Okay. So, probably should move a naval asset up here, near Wilmington. Prevent European mobilization there. Small percent chance that would damage the fort at Pulaski. We didn't. We did influence its supply, but we didn't destroy the fort. All these forts down here in Florida. Try and see. Well, let's see about moving. Go for Mobile. We could. I mean, I don't have any troops on transports right now, but theoretically, these naval vessels effective enough anyway at reducing enemy forts. It would appear we just destroyed the fort south of Mobile. New units. We got another gunboat we can deploy up here in New York. It'll move to the Mississippi River when it's placed on that hex. Takes a few turns to do it. And we've got a lot of land units left to move, but I don't know that I want to move them. Meanwhile, I'll move our cavalry out here in the New Mexico territory behind the enemy lines. And I did mention I wanted to show you partisan warfare, so if we go to Kentucky here, we can see these. Well, actually, nothing up here, so that was just an event triggered. But you can see these little partisan icons represent, like, these guys are going to deny supply if you don't have a garrison here. These guys could rise up in your, in your rear if you don't have any troops there. So partisans, something you need to think about as you take territory from the Confederates. You need to garrison to prevent, things you don't want happening. So we can go ahead and buy. I can't buy any more cores. I've already maxed out the cores. Let's do R&D. So we can do infantry weapons. That influences, things like Henry repeaters, infantry tactics. I think that's worthwhile spending on. Naval tactics too. We're almost to the max amount we can spend. Experimental amphibious warfare. There's also submarines. You can also spend money on subs. Buoyancy tanks for subs? I don't think I'd do that as the ally or as the Americans. Balloons, maybe? And now that maxed out our research. So we can't research anything else till some of the stuff gets researched. We still have 270 MPPs left, which is enough for a frigate. Give me the frigates. Alright. End the turn. Union celebrates the capture of Murfreesboro. I've been pretty passive, I think, on the ground warfare side of things. Bandits in Kentucky. Really shooting up stuff out there. See a new season, more income for the Union. And the more you can make this sort of a grinding war of attrition, obviously the Union's going to have a big economic advantage, so that's a big... the Union wants to wield that stick. The Confederacy wants to do as much as they can to win engagements on the battlefield so they can turn European public opinion to their side. I have not played where I saw the Europeans come in on my side. When I played as the Confederacy in my Let's Play previously, I defeated the Union more quickly than they came in. And when I played as the Union, obviously, I had a fair bit of success, and the Europeans never really got all that close. I'd be curious in a play by email or against another human opponent how well you can manipulate that with spending on diplomacy, too. Obviously, as the Union, we have not spent anything on diplomacy yet, but certainly would be something to consider. And events like the Trent Affair and other things like that do occur in this game, where, you know, the Union historically made a bit of a gaffe and almost, I don't know if it was really that close, but the British threatened anyway, you know, potentially getting involved when the Americans seized a British ship, removing some Confederate envoys from there. Oh, there's an enemy submarine you can see there. Went for the gunboat. Out at sea, probably not as effective. Virginia moving up toward the Potomac. That's gutsy of it. Meanwhile, we lost the ironclad near Memphis. More heavy fighting in the valley here. Confederates attacking our divisions. They're actually destroying one of our divisions there under Nathaniel Banks. That seems right. Nathaniel Banks, not a very effective commander. And we haven't really touched... We've touched on headquarters in the previous looks at the games, but we didn't really touch on effectiveness for headquarters. So different headquarters have different commanders who can have different levels of effectiveness. Now, they can cost MPPs to replace and assign new guys, but you can have some generals who are better than others. And so we'll take a look at that here in a moment, once we're through the Confederate turn. Meanwhile, I probably moved too aggressively with Grant's army south of Nashville, and now my troops there are paying the price. Confederates have moved a lot of troops there and are launching a counteroffensive toward Nashville, it would appear, as they destroy a couple of our lighter units. The two larger divisions there are still intact, but the smaller units, a couple of them got destroyed there. The AI in this game does tend to be pretty aggressive. They don't just let you sit back and pick them apart. It's easier to pick them apart as the Union, where you have the freedom of movement along the coast with your naval assets, which vastly outclass the Confederate naval assets. Although the Confederates can invest in naval stuff as well to try to close the gap. You're not going to, at least not without the British, but you know, you can at least have some local advantages depending on how effectively you invest. Okay. I'm guessing that about does it for the Confederates this turn. Well, maybe not. They're still moving some units. But no, they engaged our garrison there. Near Fort Baxter. I do also like with the lighter cavalry units, you can definitely use them to raid into the enemy rear to try and cut off supplies and influence operations. That's another way in which the Civil War game is different from the other ones. It is a very different game. First of all, it's a huge map. You know, hex size to mile size. This is probably the most granular map in the game. Maybe some of the individual scenario operations like West Front in World War I, where it's just the 1914 drive, are comparable. Also, you do have to deal with the Mexican Civil War, or I guess the European intervention in Mexico that's going on right now. You can see we just had an event further south where territory was being taken. All these convoy routes which were raiding, influencing the Confederate economy. We lost one brigade, a gunboat, a division, and a river ironclad. You can see the MPP influences down here. Massive scale Panzer General? Kind of. It's more like if the Panzer General style of game had a strategic map game instead of tactical battles. You know, Panzer General is much more like, we're going to fight this particular campaign. Whereas the, you know, this game is very much on a strategic map. Anyway, we just pissed off some European merchants. Pioneer submarine, huh? Get them, boys. Drove them into Wilmington Harbor. Okay. So you can see these coastal operations. You're kind of trying to hold, advancing aggressively into the Carolinas with a handful of units is risky because the enemy can come in behind you and retake all these ports and key cities, which can dramatically help their trade. So I'm probably being overly aggressive in that Suffolk campaign down there. It looks like the Virginia's moved up this way. Let's go ahead and see if we can finish her off. She's down to 5, but still surviving. Kind of got her blockaded in here in Chesapeake Bay, though, now. I don't think my gunboat will finish her off. Gunboats are too weak. Almost, though. I'm pushing her up the Potomac River. Alright. Attacked a brigade here. Destroyed that oh, I thought we destroyed it. Instead, we just made it run. Also, I didn't say that during the World War I game. One of the things that you can have, like, prepared attacks where you're already in a hex and then attack an adjacent hex. You get a more effective attack than when you move and then attack. Okay. I'd like to destroy Fort Pulaski, but probably better off sending an amphibious force down there to do that. Can we move past the port, or can we not? I'm wondering if we can move upriver. No, it looks like until you take the actual port of Mobile, you can't move past the river. So I can't actually reduce Mobile's fort. I could reduce Pensacola's fort. And that would open up the route to taking Pensacola to make it much easier. Convoy mode to Raider. Oh, I can't get him back out of that hex. So it kind of opens up that route for him. Right, let's finish off these Confederate gunboats south of New Orleans. Got him. Okay. Alright, Baton Rouge is ours. We've advanced up there. Another fighting objective for us. Good job. Hudson, I'm guessing, is not unoccupied. But if you take Port Hudson, it blockades Vicksburg. For that very reason, I'm assuming it's not unoccupied. I can't actually see far enough up that way to see if that's true. Fuck it. Yeah, I was wrong. Or I was right. It's like, go take Port Hudson. No, you get blocked by a division there. You can see again, like, this is how you take these different positions to cut the Confederacy off. Cut it in two. Ah, I keep running into bad guys. Don't overextend yourself. Okay. So when I said headquarters here, so because I already moved them. So Halleck here, you can see sack or replace. So Halleck is a level 4 general. I can go ahead and sack or replace him with other commanders. There's McLaren, Hunter, Gilbert, Hubert. Not anyone better than 4 right now. Grant is a 6, so if I went ahead and sacked and replaced him, I could do it with McLaren. I'm surprised there's no Sherman yet, but that might be something you unlock with research. So it costs MPPs to replace Grant with McLaren. We can do that. And then the headquarters is less effective with a lower skill general. So you'd probably never want to do that unless you really just wanted to move where Grant was. But now I can move Grant over here and replace Halleck with him and spend more money to do that. So interesting little way to do that. Let's move this amphibious force south. Gunboats are... Ironclads are usually not as good at destroying forts. You can see here, obviously. Ow! That division got rocked. But you can see how we dropped amphibious troops behind the enemy lines, and now the enemy would, in theory, if I did march into an enemy corps, have to respond to that. So, that's that. Anyway, guys, that is Strategic Command American Civil War, the 4th game in the Strategic Command series. The thing that impressed me most about this game, again, is its modeling of naval and amphibious combat. A lot of games do land combat for the Civil War reasonably well. Very few do the strategic implications of the way that the rivers influence the overall campaign and also the coastal operations. And this game does a good job of that, I think. So that by itself, I think, makes it an interesting game to take a look at. Now, we are streaming this, again, because the Strategic Command series is on sale, up to 60% off on certain titles. You have seen links in the description periodically letting you know you can go buy that on Steam or directly through Matrix's website to get the discount. And that's probably going to do it here today for us. We've looked at 4 different games: Strategic Command American Civil War, World War I, Strategic Command World War II, War in the Pacific, and Strategic Command World War II, War in Europe. Those are all available on Steam and Matrix's website. I want to say thank you again to the folks at Matrix for sponsoring this stream. And with that being said, it's getting late here, so we're going to go ahead and sign off. Hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Thanks again for coming out. Until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying once again, thank you very much for watching. And until next time, I'm out. Bye-bye.